if it's your Zoom line.
No, it's just fine.
No, he knows how to do this. She does. Yeah, this is all part of your transparency thing, is making sure everything's recorded, right?
That's right. We can publish either as videos or as transcripts. It's the modality is we can determine it after the conversation.
Okay. Just curious if you had a chance to look over the 10 pages of stuff I sent to you.
Yeah, I did.
You did.
I also followed every link. So.
I don't know how you do it. I can't quite picture. I know you had this interviewer ask you, what are your days like? And you said it depends on what day. But I don't know.
And so this is a Friday. I don't have to go to the cabinet office. So time structure wise, I have 6 hours for this conversation. But I understand it's late for you in the day. So I'm not saying that we have to do 6 hours.
Well, maybe we will. Maybe I'll just get to bed really late. I don't know. We will see.
Okay.
And I realized after I finished writing the stuff that I sent to you, sorting out all these notes, which I've been doing for several days now, it sort of summarized in my head, the story of the wise men and the elephant, who are some feeling the leg of the elephant, some feeling I feel like the Taiwan, I'm looking through these different lenses of different people who are reporting on it. And I don't know what the elephant looks like myself, so I'm curious where you would go if you wanted to go through it step by step, or you just sort of see the general. At first, I don't quite know what's going on. I would love to hear more details.
I would like to interject something small, which is I find it usually helps to define a purpose for a call at the beginning. It helps navigate it. I'm not going to define the purpose. I am writing along, but if the two of you could get to a shared purpose, I think the call will be.
Okay, and this is when we bring out the whiteboard. All right. In your 10-page document, there is actually already quite some purposes. And then there is also your perspective, right? Is to connecting as people and as change agents, catalysts, whatever, channels. And B, to go into the function, the process, and logic, not necessarily in that order, of each Taiwan.
I still want to repeat my question because this is what is proposed to do. But the purpose is what is the hope that doing these things will accomplish?
Like the end point?
Yeah. If this is a successful meeting, what will you each have gotten from it?
I will know the two of you more. That's the connect part. I'll perhaps ask you to share some ideas and life stories, and that's sufficient for me. Supposedly you will understand more the philosophy, the logic that led to V-Taiwan, and so learning, satisfying curiosity, I think would be a mutual success factor. I can't think of anything else right now.
Tom, do you have something of yours?
That describes it. It's based on things that I wrote earlier. I don't have all these distinctions made as to purpose and what I want to do and the rest. So, but yes, I would love to have a sense of connection and reality. I feel like I already have some connection to Audrey from interviews, reading and listening to interviews in terms of your past, Audrey. And I know there's more. It goes on forever, lives are fractal. But I am there's a way where my an underlying need regarding the V Taiwan is a sense that I started out reading a couple of articles and thinking I kind of got it and got all excited. And then the more I read, the more complex it got, and it was harder to feel like I either knew or could know. So I'm interested in having a bit more of a landing place because I want to talk about it. I want to think about it. I want to to write about it because it feels, each little piece that I see feels like major breakthrough, and that it has many tendrils into my thinking and my work. And I would like to share it, and I don't feel I can share it or be articulate about it at this stage. Everything I say feels like an oversimplification, a radical oversimplification.
Right. So share with simplicity, but not oversimplifying. So, okay.
The simplicity on the other side of complexity instead of the simplicity on this side of complexity.
That's exactly right. So with the right kind of simplicity, let's call it positive simplicity. Okay. Right. So something like that, right? Okay. So is that sufficiently purposeful? It is to me, so I'm fine. Okay. Right. So so let's if the idea is to find a landing place, I will start by describing V Taiwan as I see it, and then perhaps we can explore any and each of the tendrils, such as the bugs or challenges that you brought up, as well as the connection to other methodologies.
Okay.
V Taiwan, simply put, is a Kung. It's a and this word pronounced K-E-N-G in the first tone. It's kind of core of what this is about. Literally, it's translated as variously a gap or a hole or a crate, right? It evokes the image of something that's bumpy in the road that is below the surface, like this shape. Okay. And this is the word that we use in the Gov Zero movement. And it's one of the three core concepts. It's people, it's projects or gaps, and there's marathons or meetups or congregations, but it's pronounced song. And so this is one of the three main concepts. The idea is that we discover projects or which are simply put just excuse for people to meet. And the meeting is simply an excuse to get to know people better. And the people are simply an excuse to find more projects. So it is a recursive public, as some academics say, that really exists in a kind of co-intelligent fashion for people to just randomly show up and do things. So it's very much just a moniker. And so as a Kung, it leads to the song or the meetups that is every Wednesday from roughly 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. With plenty of pizza, and there was some wine last Wednesday. There's also a lot of cooking involved, but mostly just people having a good time. But the people who went there are, again, from all the sectors. And we talk about as excuse for a meeting, how to deliberate data integration, how to integrate government data, open data, with citizens contributed data, like this air pollution sensors, which 2,000 of them are built by the citizens. And so kind of is parallel to the government's legitimacy. And so how to integrate those different sources of truth to have our facts, to have a reasonable discussion. And so, and whether we need a law for it, a special law for it, or special chapter on a certain law, like the Freedom of Information Act or the Privacy Act, or it could just be a set of regulations. And we send out rolling surveys to discuss stakeholders. And that's all done in the space and time of maybe 3 hours over the previous Wednesday. And we do that every Wednesday. So every Wednesday we do something different, and the agenda is always set by the people who happens to be there. And there's some norms, such as making a transparent note of what happened. So the next week it could be a completely different bunch of people, but they could carry on the work. So that's how I see Taiwan. It's just a excuse for people to meet every Wednesday evening to have fun.
That certainly turns everything I'm thinking inside out, and I start from square zero. I
mean, we did all those things that you saw reported abroad and so on.
So the people who are reporting had not had the benefit of this little talk, and we're trying to, land somewhere. We're trying to say, this is what's going on, missing the essence, the internal essence of what you're doing and the motivational essence. And it feels like, I don't know to what extent that's cultural or that's you or whatever, but I have to either scramble or just sit back to move into that reality, into that paradigm, which I like the sound of, and I wish I could be more in that, but it's hyper new to me to think and feel that way as a form of participatory governance. I keep wanting to go, well, does it this and does it do that? And it's like, well, okay, this push the reset button here.
I have a clarifying question.
Yes.
The way that I'm understanding it, the people that you're talking about are the people who maintain and sustain and design and expand the platform, not the process of citizen participation, correct?
That depends on who shows up, right? if a minister shows up, you get regulatory commitments. If a political scientist shows up, you get new thesis or discourse. There's quite a few master thesis born out of hackathons like this. If a powerful civil society organizer shows up, as was the case a few months ago, you get completely new campaigns. If you have people who would later become moderator of the National Forum of Judicial Reform, then you get to influence the process of the national judicial reform process. So it is random.
It's like an immersion incubator. It's a place where relationship and platform and ideas mutually influence.
I guess you can say that. So it is like an incubator. Physically, it takes certainly place in the Social Innovation Lab in Taipei, and which is a national program to incubate social innovations of any kind. I think it's helpful to say that before the 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. thing, already I spent the entire day from 10 a.m. onward in the same building in my office hour. And so anyone literally can just show up. And by the way, this is how the space looks like. It is a lot of fun just by walking into this space. I think this particular football thing is designed by people with Down syndrome who turn out to be better artists than we are in designing this sort of thing. And so in the social innovation, and you have like markets of social enterprises. So this is my office. And you see here the red ones are the days that I happen to be elsewhere, but otherwise I'm all here from 10 a.m. onwards every Wednesday, so people can just talk to me with their ideas, as long as it's published transparently. So what I'm trying to get at is that this space itself is the kind of place you're describing, and V Taiwan is just one of the 400 or so activities that takes place in this physical space that I think shares more of its spirit, but there's many other ones going on too. The Universal Basic Income Gathering also is here, and many other endeavors.
There's a funny way that this space is at least as much platform or even more platform than the online space, and they're sort of coexistent. The online space lives in the physical space, and the physical space lives in the online space, and the activities and thoughts flow between them. And it's like a meta open space conference ongoing all the time, or something like that. I don't know. I'm trying to find paths with my existing knowledge.
Yeah, the place itself, it was established just, I think, 6 months ago or something, and it was like completely ruined a year before. And we had a co-creation workshop, the result of which was that we need 5 more co-creation workshops. So we hold 5 co-creation workshops and every week and talk with hundreds of social innovators. So the government really just provided a budget and a hardware, but how it need to be allocated is entirely co-designed. People said, we need a kitchen with proper oven and everything, and we get a kitchen and a cafe. People said we need a chef. We have a resident chef. People said that we need 2 very large rooms with nothing in it but wireless connection. You get that. People said we need a basement so that we can have blind facilitators to lead the sighted people to show their vulnerabilities, dialogue in the dark. We have that. They say the minister need to be here every Wednesday. We did that. So that's how the space came about.
Is there any kind of pre-intentionality of any given person trying to bring another person there, or establish a particular kind of discussion, or it is totally emergent in the moment?
In my Wednesday office hour, we have people who are running for mayor in the upcoming campaign at the end of year, and trying to have a talk and bring their own live streaming equipment to try to steer or harness this energy for his particular county. And we're fine with that. And so, yeah, there's many political forces, I guess, but they're ephemeral. They're not recurring. What's recurring become part of the culture. Yeah.
So the culture is very porous, malleable. It can
fluid,
absorb and eject things. And if something absorbs and stays there, then it starts participating in the process of shaping.
That's
kind of
exactly right.
Recursive shaping.
Yes, so which is why we call ourselves a recursive public, right?
So what is the relationship of the Paulist process to what's going on there? Because that has a level of continuity to it, at least part of it. I'm just curious how that process unfolds, and does it sometimes start and halfway through it just dissolves because nobody's interested in doing it anymore, or what does it look like?
Yeah, Polis for us is a time saver. It's easy to get people to commit 2 minutes of their time, especially over the internet. But even face-to-face is not too hard. Everybody has 2 minutes of kindness. 20 minutes, it's harder. 2 hours, it really requires some convincing. Right? So for us to have a 6-hour discussion, it means that we must both be enjoying this, right? Because otherwise there's no point. And so facilitators, the rare wise souls, as you described, are usually saddled with so much work. Work for good, I'm sure, but work. So that if we say you don't have to manually sort through 4,000, 5,000 comments, we can have the crowd moderate themselves, but in a transparent way. It can save you much time. Then it becomes attractive to any facilitator who want to engage with thousands of people. But we don't use Polis if we don't estimate there will be thousands of people. If there's just 20 people, we get much more high quality discussion face to face anyway. It's only when it is a controversial or very popular topic that we anticipate thousands, tens of thousands of people, then we use Polis, because otherwise the facilitators burn out and we don't have much fun anymore. So that's how we use or see Polis.
But the energy for Polis comes totally from the grassroots in this space, and is the government still committed to? I mean, I'm beginning to see. Okay, so there isn't a specific pattern of conversations afterward. The conversations that come after an exercise with Polis are whatever various people have energy for, and whoever can be pulled together for them.
That's right. That's exactly right. And because all the data is open, you can't really misinterpret it much, right? Everybody else keeps everyone in balance, in check. But if you have the energy to harness it in some way, you're always welcome. The government is bound to the degree that it need to answer to the consensus items, but it could be done in a way that's entirely written. It doesn't have to verbally defend itself, especially if it is a law rather than a regulation. Then usually it is defended in the parliament rather than in a citizens' council. If it is a regulation, though, usually it leads to face-to-face discussions where we go through the points one by one. So it really, varies case by case.
Okay. So the difference between Parliament's involvement and the minister's involvement is whether the implications of what you're doing it for involve law or regulation.
That's right.
Okay, that's clarifying. Yeah, but in terms of the conversations afterwards, a bunch of people go up to the people who run the, Talk in Taiwan activity and say, hey, we have a couple of people we pulled together for a conversation. Can you schedule that and let us know when it is so we can spread the word, kind of thing. And that's how it happens.
That's right.
The sense of trying to achieve representation of the population or representation of the full spectrum of stakeholders or whatever, there isn't any expectation of that happening. There's just whatever somebody has energy for, that's how much of that is there, and everybody is taking that into account and how they respond.
Right. So yes, usually, you have the experts here who define the problem statement, right? You have a lot of controversies here. Polis, I think, is really good at making sure the divergence in the first diamond is fair, in the sense that it doesn't skew any whichever way. So you really get a full spectrum of possible creativity, and maybe it converges a little bit by way of crowd moderation. But everything onward, as you said, usually people do a referendum here or do a parliamentary vote here, or a random council, a sortition, right? We did all this at this stage, but it is so far removed from the initial expansion stage, where is most of what the V Taiwan effort is, so that we don't care much really about the representativeness, either in a statistics way or in a democratic representation kind of way. We care.
It's closer to a brainstorm kind of the way it'd be looked at. Is here we're going to generate a whole pile of possibilities and sort of check out which ones seem to be attractive.
That's exactly right. So we care about the representation, right? The accurate presentation of the ideas as it's originally written. We don't try to synthesize too much. So it is a representing of what people have originally thought. And we carry it through a accountability trail all the way to the final decision. But the methods used in the phases here, and here are completely different for each case.
And in the second triangle, is it largely the conversational kind of different kinds of conversation are happening in an effort to get to something solid that's been through a more focused conversational process, or seven different focused conversational processes, whatever. But the intention here is to start from whatever results have come out of the first section.
That's right.
And then newly expand from them in new ways, and then come to some conclusion. And where the first part, where you have the question marks, what is it that people are talking about? Where does that come from? What's the articulation of that piece of the puzzle? Does whoever has the energy to create one? And they say
we need at least two people, right, to have perspectives, right? So yes, if people think that this is something that has the potential of become something public, then they use e-petition, for example, is a great example, because if you have 5,000 people, there's bound to be at least 5 different perspectives in those 5,000 people. So it is kind of predetermined that if you send out invitation of Polis to tens of thousands of people who are counter petitioners, then you get something valuable. Right,
so sometimes the petition activity is going on at the beginning and generates a polis activity. It's not necessarily directly to. It can be, but it's not necessarily directly.
It can be the triggering threshold for using polis is simply that we anticipate there will be thousands of people.
And that's whoever is organizing the use of polis. Anybody could organize polis, but it's not.
Yes.
It's in order to get enough people saying, yeah, let's use polis, you have to demonstrate to them that it's going to worth their while to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yes. And we have many other tools. It doesn't have to be polis.
Yeah. I understand there are lots of, I mean, in the chart, in the Colin's chart, there were lots of, over here we use this, over here we use this. I don't know all things, but I do get the sense. And his chart isn't like, this is how we do it all the time. His chart is more like, this is an example of how we would do it.
Yeah, exactly. And for the next case, we have a completely different methodology if people all have a rough consensus about it. Yeah.
Okay, so that's where the rough consensus comes in terms of operationality.
Mm-hmm.
That there's, and the rough consensus being a group of engineers who are talking about this, the working group that they're talking about is, in a sense, a group of people who are gathered together either online or in the space you showed us, and they're talking about whether they want to focus on this, that, or the other, and out of that comes and there are facilitators of that who are like the chairman they're talking about in the...
That's right. We have a few norms, like the facilitator need to be neutral, preferably not strongly affiliated with one of the sides of the stakeholders, and that they're at least fluent in translating the issue into common language that can include more people. But if they are not, we have people who can help. So it is more of a group effort than anything.
And the roles are not solid. People go into various roles depending on what their mixture of their skills and what they want to do at that time. Or somebody calls them up and says, hey, we need an X and come on down. The level of self-organization, again, it's like when I talked about the connection that we would have because of my experience on the Peace March and your Sunflower Movement experience, and I go, this really is at this level of self-organization. It's like whatever shows up, whoever shows up with the right people, and whatever happens, the only thing that could happen. I am blown away. Anyway, go ahead, Miki.
I have also again a clarifying question, which is, suppose there is an issue that it has a very sharp divide between urban and rural people. I'm just making it up. The way that you describe everything, when I imagine the typical participant, they don't look very rural to me. So I completely understand that it doesn't matter to have representative sample. All that matters is that the issues and perspectives are on the table. But if there's a perspective that is wholly rural, how will it ever make it here?
Okay. There's many concrete cases. There's one, I can talk about the helicopter case, which is a fascinating case. It's about in the south of Taiwan. There's this little town called Hengchun. It's a very popular tourism place, but it's a small town in the south. There's about 8,000 petitions at a time for this place, which has an airport that has been neglected for a very long time, for a few years. The petition says we need to ask the Minister of Interior to deploy the Black Hawk helicopters to our airport to serve as ambulance cars so that people who run into strokes or had a diving accident can get to a major hospital in Kaohsiung here in time. And it is despite being a popular tourist destination, there's no big hospital there. There really is nobody who can operate a surgery for the brain or anything like that. And the nearest large hospital that has both the equipment and the doctors are 90 minutes or 100 minutes away. So people die because of this. So it's a real problem. And ambulance helicopters is not an unheard of idea. And so, they garnered support not because there's 8,000 people in that town, but because they, in their bed and breakfast, put up those signs that says, do you know what will happen if you have a diving accident? Here's this QR code, bring out your phone, sign the petition before you check in our bed and breakfast. And so there's grassroots mobilization that lead to one of the fastest petitions we ever saw in the petition platform. And because every month we have participation officers in every ministry who bring these kind of things to the table. And the Ministry of Interior's participation officer says, we really don't have that many Black Hawk helicopters to spare, and we're not sure that people with stroke are the best to be carried by helicopters anyway. But it's very difficult to convince people of that. So we have this regulation that says when there's multiple agencies who each consider other agencies to be responsible agencies for a petition, all of them become responsible agencies. So, I personally wrote that in. So it's a snowballing regulation. The agency for Black Hawk says it's really the firefighting department's thing. They said, no, it's the Ministry of Defense. They said, no, it's the Ministry of Transportation and Communication, because all they really want is a faster road, a highway. The people in the Ministry of Transportation said they don't really want a highway because that kills the tourism along the road. What they really want is a larger hospital. So it's the Ministry of Health and Welfare, and so on. And so we have this many agencies finally become co-authoring agencies. And so we went to Hengchun. We all the agencies that you just saw went to Hengchun together. And we met with the petitioners who insist, instead of the usual 5 counter-signature representatives, that they have 10 different viewpoints. So they really need 10 people. And so we have 10 people, each with a very different viewpoint on how to solve this quagmire. And so there's a video that I can play for you. Let me quickly find it, maybe. It's just
we have
2
a
minutes.
saying here that what's everybody's responsibility is nobody's responsibility. And I said,
exactly.
You turned around.
Right.
You said what's nobody's responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility.
Right. So I started by saying anyone can join through live stream and through Slido, which is a way to ask questions. And this is our facilitator saying that we're here to solve a systematic problem, to effect systematic change, not to solve a one-shot issue. Here's she explaining where we are in the double diamond. We're done with the expansion of possible opportunities, and we're now trying to delve into the feasibility into each one, but we will not make a decision right here. We're not at the last quarter. And the ministries responsible for them will be responsible for the gray places. And this is our petitioner who feels very strongly for helicopters. And everything they say, not just immediately transcribed, but also are mapped in a mind map that looks like this. So this is the Black Hawk operating unit. I think he's a sergeant or something. I don't really know, a senior officer, and to explain why it's really not a very good idea. The blue one, the green ones are the concerns that's raised. The yellow ones delves into the details of the concerns. The orange ones are the responses, initial response from ministries, and the blue ones are supporting facts. And this is the town representative, one of the councillors. And this is the head of the hospital, the largest hospital, which is rather small in that town. And from the Ministry of Health and Welfare, talking with the hospital people. And this is the county councillor, not the town councillor. And here she is citing a fact that there really is zero doctor who can perform this kind of surgery in all the three small hospitals there. And so we have MP who is voted. This is his district who sent his staff to propose his ideas. This is a local lawyer and community organizer who have already gathered support and consolidated opinion of a particular faction. And the MP himself calls in from Taipei. And the Minister of Transport people is trying to say that it won't make tourism and economy better if we have a highway. And airport people explains about how they try to revitalize the airport. And there's many technical arguments about what kind of flights, what kind of planes can be flew on the airfield there. And so this is the local county person. So we took easily more than 4 hours if you include the pre-meetings and the follow-up clarifications. It's easily an entire day from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. officially, but it's actually much longer after the 2 p.m. And so we are reasonably sure we explored all the different solution paths and the pros and cons of each. And so the Ministry of Interior made a documentary, which the short version of which you just saw. And so finally, the insight here is whether people who are born there and when become surgeons and nurses will keep their heart there. What makes them go to urban places? What makes them not service their extended family there? And so it turns out that if we do deploy helicopters, more of them will just go away because they don't have anything to exercise their skill for. And so the rough consensus at that end of the day is that we need better dormitory, we need high-end equipment, we can fly people from the north from the city areas to practice their skills here if necessary, so that we can fly doctors here instead of flying patients north. But at the end, we need to support their extended family, their education and so on, so they will want to stay at this place. So they allocated, I think I'm translating to US dollars in my mind. Let me make sure that I don't get the magnitude incorrect. But yeah, so every Friday when we have this meeting, I bring this mind map into the meeting with the Premier and other ministers with our portfolio the very next Monday. And this is anyway live stream, so the press are all over it. And so, yeah, we allocated at the end $10 million US dollars to build a large hospital there. And it's not that this is the solution that is proposed for the first time. No, it's been proposed like 10 years, but it's always in the utilitarian sense, not the most cost-effective solution. but we can demonstrate to the Prime Minister we explore everything else, and none of it has the same consensus as this solution. So there's 10 million US dollars. And so it's now building the large hospital. So what I'm trying to get at is that first, we always go to the place. And second, we return to the place. We make sure that when we have meetings like this, they're ordered in the sense that people know each other face to face. And then we follow up with meetings touring around Taiwan by connecting people, for example, in Hualien or in other South rural places here with 12 different ministries in Taipei. And this happens every other Tuesday. So we can follow up on what we have promised. The Prime Minister himself visits 2 counties or cities every week this way. And I'm more of a recurring round trip thing. And so over time, people get to know the ministry people from the central government more. And so we get to more, I would say, coordinated or more focused conversation every time I return to a particular place. And so, yeah, we don't think urban and rural are essentially 2 places. If we systematically deploy projections, connected rooms, it might as well be the same place. And the Taipei video conferencing space is always the social innovation lab. So the senior executive who go into there are already in a more playful mood. Yeah, it is a long-winded answer, but I hope it answers your question.
It's a long wind that blows here. That's
what I'm hearing, I want to see if I understand the answer. What I'm hearing is that when there is any reason to believe, either because of the source of the petition or because of the nature of the issue, that there are specific populations that would be necessary to involve. Mm-hmm. Then the design of how to bring people together will incorporate that consideration.
Mm-hmm. And we'll put, again, the idea of representation first, right? Yes. Because their natural modality is not to travel 10 hours, 5 hours to Taipei and speak for 20 minutes. That's not very useful.
Yes.
Right. So the natural way, if we think about representation, is just to bring a 360 recorder and make everyone who can have a VR glass or something relive the experience of the town hall locally, which we did in the Penghu Islands. It's a very rural island. So the virtual reality immersive recording is really important because not everyone can travel there.
So they are experiencing it after it's happened. They're not in the midst. It's not the virtual reality is not a helping people be in the midst of the conversation while it's going on.
Well, it's helping maybe 50 people, but yeah, the majority of people did that after the fact.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wow. Mm-hmm. So there's a funny way in which the pieces of this, I can easily see pieces of this being applied elsewhere, but it feels like the culture, the history, the subculture, your own personality and capacities, all of these add up to making this possible, functional, productive, where it's happening now. You can always export Paul-esque, but it would be contained within some other structure, some other series of steps or motivations or whatever, mm-hmm. that yes. Having to try and replicate it, you'd have to start with people who are in love with open space and self-organization and each other, mm-hmm. and trying to find where that is. If you wanted to transplant the whole kind of thing you have, you would mm-hmm. have to transplant it into that kind of soil, and hopefully there would be government that was responsive to that kind of activity. I don't know how one would find such a place, but I'm sensing the foundations of it are not, this process does that, so we're going to do this process. And so it really is grounded in the conversation among people who are interested in the topic, the process, each other, whatever. It's like, it's true. I mean, I've been in conversations talking about what is an open space organization. And I've never seen anything remotely like this, but it's very recognizable, in terms of the open space principles and spirit,
I have a question, if it's okay. Is it Tom?
Yeah, right. I'm still in the process of reorienting to figure out what else I want to ask, because I recognize I'm treading water in a much bigger sea than I thought. I'm looking for ground to stand. That's not what's going on.
So I like to think in terms of building blocks and principles. And I have a sense that the building blocks here are, specific platforms, specific experiences, cumulative experience of different things that work in different contexts that you can then, kind of like generalize and get little bits. And my guess is, I'm sorry. And then there is design principles. And I'm talking about at the meta level of design principles. Let me say what I mean. A core design principle that I am gleaning from this is use the natural and emergent strengths of the culture and the people that are involved. And in some other place, the same principle might result in a design that will be semi-top-down. In some other place, it might result in a design that is very organized, where there are local circles that then send representatives to something else. If you apply that meta principle of what are the strengths of the local culture and the local people, not what did they do in Taiwan and how can you do it here, but how did they go about figuring out what they could do, and how can we replicate the process of figuring out what to do? I want to know if what I'm saying makes sense to you.
Yes.
Totally.
Yes. I will note that this is precisely how internet was born. Born. Yeah, it is people initially are of a more academic and well-connected to DARPA academic culture, and gradually including the telecom operators and the initial bunch of human-computer interaction experts, and finally academics of other disciplines, and then the general public. And so, if you start the internet protocol with a different bunch of people, with the military people, it will be very top down, even though technically it's the same internet protocol.
Yes. Yeah, it's like a mobile. There are certain mobiles that only operate in one way, and there are certain other mobiles that if you pick this piece and you hang it from this piece, it looks a certain way, but if you pick this other piece and you hang it from there, it looks a different way, but it's the same building blocks. It changes. So relationship and capitalizing on local strengths and local sensibilities is paramount if this thing is going to be extrapolated. It can't be replicated, can't be exported. It can only be extrapolated, kind of like packaged into principles and building blocks, and then redeployed in some other place based on the capacities that are in existence there. Am I making sense to you?
Yes. Yes. I mean, the specific procedures or processes, as you said it, but I prefer procedures. It seems more lowercase. The procedures, as you said, are like Lego blocks. You can take Polis, you can take this real-time board, you can take Slido. There's many procedures, micro procedures that people can use to generally save their time, to reduce their risk, and occasionally get more creative. And all these are good things, right? But the policies, and I mean it both in a written policy, like regulation kind of way. Like I wrote many regulations that enable this structure without me having to maintain it by force, right? But also the cultural norms, that is a mirror of the local norm. Yeah. And finally, above the procedure and policies, you have the power structure. That is what people recognize are influential in their way of action. And for that, we can't export it. Right? We're not some other more violent regimes. So we don't export democracy this way. So it's always buttoned up in this fashion. It's true. And I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Part of what occurs to me is when you were talking, Miki, was of a pattern language, because a lot of the elements you're talking about are here's a pattern, here's a dynamic that is an essential piece of the whole, but it will manifest differently in every place, in every circumstance. And to have that level of abstraction that is not total abstraction, it's design abstraction. Saying you need a pillar to hold up the roof, kind of thing. And but it feels like, again, since I'm coming from looking at the whole world and where the whole world is headed, and things are getting better and better and worse, faster and faster simultaneously. And I would love to enhance the better and better part to address the worse and worse, because some of it's pretty hairy. It's not a matter of exporting per se, as we are going to export this full-blown car or this full-blown social system. But I try and go, what would allow or encourage this kind of living system to sprout in other environments? And there's a sense, it's not so much, it's like halfway, it's sort of consultant, but there's some kind of catalytic energy. There's a deep understanding of what's going on here, a sense of the patterns and the limitations to how one applies the patterns to real life situations. There's a sense in which it's a permaculture project. A permaculture designer is there to be present with what the site and the life in the site is telling them, and then dancing with the site and try this, try that, whatever. And you couldn't just read the book and apply it. You would have to see, first of all, are the basics of what would be required. What are the fundamentals? There's something about the energy, the networks, the eagerness, the situation that would say this is a space within which this thing can grow. And once that is identified, then people, the life energy of those people can dance with the catalytic consultant. It's not like take the training. It's like, let's try this and see what happens. Let's try that, see what happens. And the sensibilities, the discernment capacities of the catalyst can be applied into this situation. They go, oh, have you thought about this? Or let's look at how this is unfolding. It's not going in the direction we thought it was going to go, or whatever. There's some kind of dance going on there. And I would love to know how one would do that intentionally. That's why I can see your when I said us as change agents, transformational agents, evolutionary agents. It's a very risky language because you're not an agent per se when you're dancing. Agent has a little too much linearity in it. But there is a. Do you know Nora Bateson's work?
Nora Bateson.
Gregory Bateson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, this is Nora Bateson is his last daughter from his last marriage, and she's American but based in Sweden. She has a Swedish husband, and she is carrying on and extending Gregory's work.
Okay.
And she has created a new paradigm kind of based in a couple of key concepts. She's created a word called somaticity, which she defines as mutual learning in context. And her sense of what learning is not school learning. It's not necessarily progressive. It is a kind of responsiveness that leaves a trace, and that every part of life, at every level of life, is somaticity. And therefore each entity is in fact somaticity. Every one of our cells is interacting with every other cell, blah, blah, blah. And there's a funny way in which this is one of the most synesthetic synesthetic things that I have ever seen as an established practice. There is constant context. The responses are contextual. It's not that, and she has a thing she calls warm data labs, which is different stations in a space where people can go to talk about what the topic looks like from that perspective, and then move to another space. And what does the topic look like from that perspective? And sort of get a sense. Yeah, she has transcontextuality is another one of her concepts. And it is very much, interrelationality would be another. The lens you look through is a context, as well as the history is the context, situation is a context, all that. And I think of it, the energy of it is a dance energy. And since conversation is one of the primary ways humans learn in context together, to be able to be artists of conversation, artists of the dance of meaning between us. It feels like I'm trying to get Nora to think more in terms of social change than just theory. I'm wanting to, and this is, I have to tell her about the video when we get the video finished. I have to go, look, check out this video. This is closer to what you're talking about as it applies in real life than anything I've seen. And where do you go with that in terms of how to use nonlinear intentionality to dance for the system into more life for that system? It feels that's what you've been doing. I mean, you're a model for how one would play that game. And I hope it doesn't require that somebody in a couple hours can read 10 pages of weird stuff from a totally different frame of reference like you did. That's a whole other skill on top of this dancing capacity you have. Anyway, I'm just trying to find the place to tread water, not to stand. Place to dance from. Anyway, Miki, you're bubbling with something. Go for it.
I have a little tiny loop that I want to close about something from before, really tiny, which is, we're talking about this hospital.
Yes.
And you were saying that the hospital is not the most cost benefit.
Yes.
Was not the most cost effective. And I want to challenge that. Because I think that it is the most cost effective if you factor in the right costs.
That's exactly right. Yes. So I was saying that in our preliminary material from the factors that could be translated into dollar terms, it was evaluated as not most cost effective.
Yes.
But our deliberation was essential, I think, in establishing that the methodology was flawed. So I do agree with your assessment.
Okay, I just, it just felt important to name it. It's like, how do you define cost? It's kind of like, if you go back to basic science, the definition of efficiency is the relationship between input and useful output. You want to maximize the ratio. And in modern capitalist culture, it has been flattened into only one dimension of linear time. So the concept of efficiency has been emptied of content, and in the same way, cost has been emptied of content and is now one-dimensional about money. That's all. But the thing that Tom was accurate, that I'm bubbling with, is I learned this concept that I really like. I don't know who invented it or where it came from, but I'm sure you know of it. It's called adjacent possible. You know this?
Adjacent possible, yes.
And I'm thinking, here we are, the three of us are talking, and you are in Taiwan, you are doing this thing. Tom and I are each doing our thing in a variety of ways and contexts and purposes. What unites us is something that we could conceivably try to define, but may not be necessary even. It's only important to recognize that there is something that is an intersection of our interests and purposes and personal predilections and all of that. And here we are. Might this be the seed of something virtual that is like the space that you have in the Social Innovation Lab? That was the thing that I was bubbling with. So, not every week, but maybe you define once a week or roving time, because if you want to do it global, it wouldn't be able to be the same time each time and not the same people, but you rove the time and you open the platform, and the first conversation is 3 people. And the second conversation, maybe those same 3 people and 2 others that they bring. And the third conversation, the first 3 may not even be there. I'm just taking the
replication of your lab.
I am exactly applying the principle to what we have. That the question that you're asking, Tom, you feel like you're treading water because it's like you are individually trying to solve the problem of what of this can be transported, where, in what form, who would support it, who would be the stakeholders. You can't, I can't, Audrey can't. But if we open a conversation and think about what is the next immediate step, it seems to me always important to have the largest vision, the most unrestrained largest vision, and the most concrete next step. Those are the 2 things most important. So that's what came to me. I'm curious, Audrey, if that appeals.
Well, Tom already knows that there is an endeavor from Jerry Mikowski called Rex, that is a series of conversations that are structured more or less the way you phrased it. I'm currently engaged in, for example, in the Digital 7, it's 7 countries, each with a government digital service or a social innovation lab, and we are holding regular calls. So yes.
This is with Jerry?
It's worthwhile. No, not with Jerry. These are 2 networks.
But this is at a governmental level, so it is less emergent than whoever shows up.
I do agree. I do agree. So yes, if you set up a time and a space, and I mean, I can participate if it is Friday at this hour, then this week, the week afterward, and the week afterward, but maybe not for a couple of weeks afterwards. So I mean, and we can certainly figure it out in more detail if we do meet in Seattle face to face. But I mean,
this is April 28th, Miki. There's a chance to talk face to face in Seattle.
Who?
Recharge my ear a second, but yeah, Tom can explain this.
Right now, it's just
Audrey is coming to the U.S.
He's coming to the U.S. to talk to the Paulist people, and has potentially a lot of time available on the 28th, and been looking at it. And if I don't know if you want to drive all the way to Seattle, I can drive.
The driving would be very complicated because I'm in Israel at that time.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
a little impossible.
Yeah. There's ways in which this fits really well with some other things that I'm working on. In some ways it doesn't fit, and it's like, again, the like the GPSs go recalibrate. Yeah, there's a lot of, I am definitely going to refer people to this video. It feels like this video is a starting place for all sorts of things that could happen. If people watch it, then they have the shift in perspective that makes this either total mystery or compelling.
Which video are you talking about?
The one that's being made right now.
Oh, the conversation we're having.
Yeah.
Actor and actor.
Yeah. And there's a piece of me that, in terms of getting to know each other better, that wants you, Miki, to share your PhD project, among many other things. But that feels like a major piece reflecting who you are in your core that she might really be interested in. Audrey might be interested in hearing.
I don't have any. I don't mind doing that. I'm not sure that is the thing that I would choose. But what I'm more drawn to is a very different level of question, which is, I want to ask you, Audrey, is there any place where you're challenged and need support?
So, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry.
Okay. Very meta. So yeah, I was saying whether my sound is still going through because I'm recharging the earphone. I think Tom listed quite a few challenges, which I would like to go through very quickly, like 1 minute each at most, one by one, so that we can identify both the frames of which we're talking about, as well as possible ways to collaborate. And so I'm going to take a picture of my screen and project it. So that's the challenges section. The first one, I think, already happened in the Airbnb case. The Airbnb case, the Airbnb company sent a letter to all its members in Taiwan, asking them to go to Police and Taiwan and support the legalization of Airbnb, basically turning itself as a mainstream media because it has so many members into campaigners. Much to their surprise, only 1/3 of their constituents supported their position. The other 2/3 has many other thoughts about Airbnb that they did not let Airbnb know, because it was not a open questionnaire that Airbnb used to ask them. So I think this proves one of the meta principles of emergence, in that if you ask people only yes and no questions, you get into this hallucination that you have a constituency of people who said yes or people who voted for you last time. But they are people. And in a much more open, multi-way dialogue, they outthink the best campaign planners collectively. And so I'm not that worried about a PR campaign. As long as they're drawn to the space that is reflective, people reflect. That's what they do. And so I think we're okay with this. Bots are technically capable of participating. But if they're only voting exactly the same way over and again, then on POTUS, they're just a single dot, because the POTUS map accounts for diversity. The area of a group is how diverse its opinions are, not how many people they have. And so it will increase the number of people sharing that cluster. So you have a cluster here, a cluster here, a cluster here, and this will read 20K, and this will read 200, and this will read 100. But it doesn't really matter. We don't even look at the numbers when interpreting a POTUS result across groups. We don't compare the population of groups, so to speak, because all we want is the full spectrum of possibilities and overall resonance. And so while this is a challenge, and I will welcome any theoretical support or mathematical support, I think we're doing okay because the interface rewards diversity over numbers. Now, if bots come and are able to generate authentic, good, creative ideas, I hope so far that has not happened.
So,
oh, God.
You're answering the question in a different way from my intention. My intention was more almost personal, not personal, but personal. And you're talking about the systems.
Right, I'm talking about technical assistance or theoretical assistance.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about this. I was talking about, like, really, what do you need?
Oh,
And
okay.
If you get worn out or you have somebody to talk to, whatever, something.
Okay, I just had
no, so for example, you can say, I need technical assistance to solve certain challenges.
Yes.
Great, I know this is not something I can help you with. Do you see what I mean? It's like, what would support you? This is a beautiful picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I am also imagining that you sometimes have like a lot of fear about what if this happened or what if that happened? I don't know how to deal with this. I have too much going on. I don't know who to talk. I don't even know. I'm just making it up. It can't all be going well.
Mm-hmm.
So where are you challenged? It's not, I'm asking you to shift realms if you're willing. If you're not, it's fine.
No, it's good. It's good. I really just had lunch, so I'm fine. And the very fact that I can, with very short notice, schedule a 6-hour meeting potentially with you says that I'm not busy at all, right? Otherwise, it would not be possible to reply email in this frequency. The fact is, I'm surrounded by genuinely good people who are good at what they're doing, and they're better than me in what they're good at they're doing. And we happen to share these core values, which are in Chinese, but I will very quickly translate for you because it is going to be important in the answer of my personal answer. But this office that I'm working in with about 20, 25 full-timers and 35 interns. We don't call ourselves an office or a digital service. We call ourselves a space. I don't give commands to my peers. And so they pick whatever they want to do, the green cards in this chart. And we do co-creation workshops every once in a while to make sure that we stay true to our core values, of which there are 5. And the central one is to build trust across sectors. And that's it. It is
across sectors?
Yeah, between sectors, between public sector, between the civil society, between people in part in the society. So to trust people first, and then maybe build some trust back. So this is our core value. The second value is to empower the civil society so that they can be well-informed and take delight in participate in public affairs. Our third value here is to simplify the process of career public servants so they have a better quality of life. Our fourth core value says to absorb risk for innovation in the public service so public servant can innovate without fear. And finally, the fifth says to let people see the value of digital services. And so these values are...
People see the value of what?
Of digital services.
Oh,
Yeah, and so all these 5, they have tension. They are not always coherent. But I think we picked the central one, which is rebuilding trust. So I'm not in fear of anything really, because every little bit I do, as long as I'm accountable and transparent, it's inching toward that value. And so this is the picture, the overall picture of my office. And in my office, my role is the not doer. I don't do anything really, and I don't assign things. I maybe give inspiring speeches once in a while, but otherwise I don't do much. But if there is something that needs to be done, taking out the trash or ordering pizza, that everybody is too busy to do, I do those things. And so that's my role. And so with a role like this, it's hard to be frustrated.
You should write a book called The Tao of Democracy.
Someone did that. I was reading the first chapter.
It's when you were going to go for the values, I don't read Chinese or anything, but I do know, because I have been to China. I have a couple of Chinese friends. I have some sense of the value of harmony in Chinese culture. And so I was very unsurprised that you picked trust. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I had an internal bet that it was somehow going to be related to harmony. And it's, it goes back to this question of local culture strengths. You cannot build anything in the US, for example, that has trust as its most important value. It just will go nowhere. Which is not a criticism of the US or a criticism of China or a criticism of anything. It's just phenomenological. It just won't fly. If you don't put some version of autonomy right at the center, nothing happens. So it's really interesting that what I'm seeing that you do is you take values that would be familiar to people. You're speaking, I'm not hearing you because you're muted.
No, it's okay. I'm speaking to someone out of the frame. So I'm sorry, just a second.
Miki?
Yeah.
There's a way in which autonomy is not exactly autonomy, but the sovereignty of the self is also part of Audrey's world, as I understand it. There's something like that that's central, which could be translated as a quicker bridge between the thing you're saying is essentially American and trust. So I'm just curious if Audrey would speak to the anarchic.
Fundamentally, the way that I understand it, there are two aspects. There's the aspect of freedom and the aspect of interdependence. Mm-hmm. And a culture that can really integrate both, it's going to be very strong and solid, or a human being that can integrate both.
Or very liquid.
Say that again?
Or very liquid. That's what I sense, that there's a way in which what Audrey is developing has that more, that integration is much closer. There's more of a yin-yang dance and internalized in each other kind of dimension to those. It's air. Excuse me, I was grounding you too much, Audrey.
Yeah, that's right. All the spaces. Per se.
I still.
Yes. Yeah, please. Yeah.
My question is, how can we serve you? You are being so generous with your time to give us information and ideas and all of that, and I feel motivated in some way to serve you.
Okay. Well, first of all, the original purpose to learn and to explore. The word, the very concept of synthesis, and the various web pages I was just reading, it's very useful, actually. It gives me new English words. I guess I learned English as my, fourth language, fifth language.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you just said.
I learned English as my fourth or my fifth language when I was already 20 years old or something. So it is an acquired cognitive tool to me. And so I don't have an innate feeling of what words makes most sense when I'm trying to translate. So any word that can evoke a more accurate representation of the feeling, I think is a gift to me, because then for the next conversation, I learn to refer people to these ideas, including the patterns that Tom outlines on his website. Those are very useful too. So in many ways, you have already helped a lot.
Got it.
I'm trying to say.
Just so you know, symathesis is not a general English word.
No.
People don't use it.
It's coined and new.
I understand that.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's why it's useful. Right? All the old words has been caught and sold and bought again, right? So it's commodity, and so which is why we need new thoughts and new words. It matters in which thought those thoughts are thought, and because I don't think natively in English.
Without the headset, if you can get closer, it would be good.
Okay, let me see if I can do it in a soft way.
Is it better? Can you hear me better this way?
Much
Yes.
better.
Much
Okay,
better.
that's great.
And you're very loud, Miki.
Right. So yeah. What I'm trying to say is that it matters when I try to think with people who think in English, which words is used to think, and I think that so far has been the greatest gift, because otherwise I'll think in new terms in other languages, but I'll have to reduce its dimensions with my limited English vocabulary of common words.
Miki is a coiner of phrases too, and has a couple of ones that are central to her work, which might serve you, like the non-controversial essence.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would be happy to share with you, some things that I've learned through my work. Mm-hmm. I think that in this context, it is, if you go back to the police picture with those 3 areas, mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you have this picture, it doesn't matter how many people are in each one, but you have 3 clusters. What current mechanisms do you have to bring these 3 clusters together?
Together. Mm-hmm. There are 2 main ways, but first I have to explain how mathematically polis works. Polis works through a idea called k-means clustering. It means that based on how people react to each other's offerings, to use Tom's word, how alike they are, and that forms clusters. But if there are 100 comments, then it is a 100-dimensional space, which is unfathomable in human brain, which is why it used another mathematical construct called principal component analysis, and try to find the axis, the vector of the most controversy, and use it as the x dimension. And it tried to find the orthogonal, that is to say, independent, equally controversial or slightly less controversial aspect as the y-axis. We prototype it in virtual reality, which gives us a third axis. But otherwise, it is just trying to find where the diversity stems from, and then reproject the clusters, of which there may be 1 to 5 at any given time, into this image. So it is the face of the crowd, but it's not machine learning or artificially intelligent in any way. It is mostly just a way to draw pretty pictures of diversity and uniqueness. And so to bring these together, mathematically speaking, is resolved either by a novel idea that suddenly everyone can identify with, and so which will result in basically a new group that looks roughly like this one, that recoalesce around this new idea. Or it could be done by having essentially no new ideas, but a eclectic blending of existing ideas that people, the less radical part of the people, can agree to, in which case you will start to see groups moving into the middle and people from the old groups joining the new group, and the new group growing slightly larger in a radically centrism kind of way. And sometimes both dynamic happens at once, and the system has to recalibrate and refine the x and y axis that represent new controversies. And what I'm getting at is that the 2 dimensions in this picture, they are not fixed. As long as they become non-controversial, the system finds new controversies to become x and y axis. So to achieve a perfect unity is very difficult or impossible in polis.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is the core of the polis idea, is that it constantly find a place where people still disagree.
Why? What's the point?
It's more fun. It's more fun this way. It's more engaging. gets people coming back. And also, it makes people think. Because if I think I'm in this tribe, but I see my Facebook friends, my Twitter friends, everyone I know, my families in other tribes, it really engaged me to think maybe they do have a point, right? These are people I have personal connection with. We just did not talk about Airbnb over dinner. And so by representing people through the dimension of how they disagree, actually engage conversation if those are people they already have a personal connection with. And all the while, there is this majority opinion tab, which is the default display anyway, that keeps track of what consensus people have already reached, despite the currently displayed factions. And so it is a game that is infinite. We harness its power and play it for a few weeks at a time, but it is a game that could go on and on. And so, I don't think this is a like completely to the point answer to your question, but this is how I see the system.
Isn't your point at some point to find a solution that people can go along with, like the hospital?
Yes, but that's the governor's interest in this. That's the hook for the prime minister to join this game. I don't know how to explain this properly, but
no,
yes.
I understand.
Yeah.
You are just enjoying the process. You're not
Yes.
particularly wedded to this or that result.
That's exactly right. I'm just having fun.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's a whole nother dimension, which is there's where they're going towards a convergence, an actionable convergence. This is something I'm newly thinking I understand, is that the actionable convergence doesn't specifically come out of the Paulist process.
No.
The Paulist
Not at all.
process is showing certain possibilities where consensus seems to have emerged, and then tossing that into face-to-face interactions as a stimulant. And there can be both disagreements and agreements can be stimulants, but it's the face-to-face thing, which is if you're going to get something actionable, it's going to come out of that. And this is just a really powerful way of checking around the conversational system.
Yeah, that's right. It's crowd agenda setting, but it's not a substitute for the conversation following the agenda.
That's a total major revelation.
Yeah, from what I read about it, I had a completely different picture of what this was. What has been written about it presented it in an entirely different light. And I now feel embarrassed, not in relation to you, in relation to truth, because I included, like a paragraph or two about this in a chapter that I wrote for a book. And what I wrote in that little bit is completely incorrect, but it's already beyond the editing process. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do.
Well, no. If you were writing about the Uber case, then all the reported facts are probably right.
But there was another article, I no longer remember, that indicated that what happened in relation to Uber was extrapolated and scaled, and that that this process is used to make all decisions. The parliament doesn't make any legislation without consulting with the people first. All of this, I think,
that's true. That's actually true. We have a central system, the join.gov.tw system. It's like regulations.gov, right? Where people publish the regulation that are to be passed. And all the regulations, all the laws do actually post on here, usually for 60 days. There are some exceptions, but usually for 60 days, and get wow, any number of participation, like large number of participation. This is about electronic ID. This is about marriage equality, essentially, and decriminalization of adultery,
and this tells
so
you
on
that
and so forth.
participation, but how does it inform the legislative process?
So yes, so here is where we need to talk about constitutional difference between the Taiwan system and the U.S. system. In Taiwan, the MPs can present a bill to the General Assembly, but the administration can also present a bill to the General Assembly. The Supreme Court, the judicial system, can also present a bill. The corrective, as the control yuan, the independent auditing agency, as well as the agency for examination and public service, can also present a bill. So all the 5 organs can present bills for the General Assembly to consider. Usually, it is the version that is proposed by the administration that becomes the base version for MPs to decide. And there's no Senate, there's just the General Assembly. And so if the president appoints the premier and is the head of the party of the parliament, as the situation now, essentially regulations and laws are very close. The laws still gets another more round of deliberation, but they stem out of the same regulation forming process. Mm-hmm. You don't need a MP to support this version at all. You just talk to the majority party. And this is important because then the executive yuan, the administration, when it makes a point-by-point response to people's ideas or consensus gathered from online spaces, it can't substitute for the MPs, but it provides the MPs in their deliberation all the basic facts that they use for deliberation. And so this is a different system than the US system.
I understand this. I think that the piece that I wrote that is completely erroneous is that from the article, I had understood that the police thing was a tool for convergence, but it's actually a tool to identify divergence and then use other tools to create convergence.
Okay. Well, don't be too hard on yourself. I mean, police does converge like it here, right? It's true. It is a converging tool, but not in the place. Maybe you did imply here, not at all. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and a lot of the articles gave more potency to the convergence that came out of Polis. Mm-hmm. And that was part of my initial excitement, and I'm grateful for the transformation of my excitement to something that's more complex.
Well, I mean, if the prime minister herself or himself or the ministers in charge of this participate in the initial game of Polis, they are, like any good deliberation, they will be changed a little bit when it comes to the later processes. So it's not like it's not useful, but it's a psychological use. It is not a hard codified use.
Right. And they will be influenced by any number of things, including any convergences that happen to show up in Polis, but it's not as if they have to take every item of convergence that happens in Polis and either implement it or say why they can't or won't.
No, they do that. They do that. It is true. They do that. Usually at a face-to-face meeting here. They do that. But they don't do it here. This is very important.
Right. Okay,
because just like for the Uber case, we did a point-by-point answer. I think we accept all of it. One with some reservation about a driver able to join multiple fleets. That's still in a gray area. We ended up doing another consultation for the platform economy guidelines for that. So there is a point-by-point response,
Right.
but it's not at the stage of signing the bill or presenting to the president to sign. That happens here. There's more process after this point.
Right. That's like the point in the middle of your bow tie here.
Mm-hmm.
The point in the middle is where there's a very explicit digestion of what has come out of the police thing. And that digestion is an informational input into the further deliberation that results in what finally comes out.
Yes.
This second part of the second diamond is not visible in the vast majority of reports that are coming out of Taiwan about,
That's right. I think even though in all our introductory materials, like in the video you just saw, the facilitator said explicitly that this area will not be visible to you at this meeting. This area, the ministry will go back to their respective ministers, and the prime minister will someday, well, it turns out really quickly, but there's no guarantee, make a response somewhere down the road. And we made it very clear in the beginning. But yes, as you said, many English write-ups skip that.
The official deliberations are actually the ones that are confined to government are happening in the convergence part of the second diamond.
That's right. And we often, but not always, invite people who make really good points at the initial diamond phase. Like I will make another example to show the dynamism of it. For example, there was this petition that says we have a explosively difficult to use tax filing system by a petitioner. And that's because in Taiwan, only people using Microsoft Windows have a good experience filing their taxes online last year. People with Mac and Linux and iPad and Android had a very bad time. And because that's a technical reason. But anyway, there's a petitioner who petitioned for it. Even before there's 5,000 people, I think we intervened when there's just 100 people or so. And say, we will do the first diamond with you, which we did. And then after the first diamond, it turns out all those petitioners, they're experts in design, in interaction, in communication, and they know more than the government people, the vendors. So we open up the user journey, which outlines the entire service journey, and say, okay, you guys know more than we do. And so we hold 5 co-creation workshops after that, and everything is transparent for the second diamond. So this does happen, but it only happens when the public service thinks the civil society, the stakeholders know more than the government for this particular issue. And we did end up co-design this year's tax filing experience, and the government mostly just provided a budget, just as in the construction of the Social Innovation Lab. But I would say only about 1 in 5 cases that makes to the second stage. The other 4/5 are politics as usual in the last half of this time.
And the beginning, the first diamond happens only when there's some energy from civil society to do it.
That's right. That's right.
The government, people in the government are not necessarily convening that, although I recognize they are also citizens and could do this, but they also have
They did a lot of petitions about the working condition of public servants. You won't believe it. There's this huge petition about how we can only take absence of 4 hours units, but people want to take 1 hour unit of leave. And that gets amazing number of petitioners very quickly.
That I can understand that, and that's different from the president deciding he or she is going to have do a one of these first, the first 2/3 or 3/4 of this process, or they're going to directly insert a proposed bill into the last quarter of the process.
We are now having laws that mandate this process currently in the parliament. One of which has already passed, the new Referendum Act. It's Switzerland style, very low threshold for the first diamond, slightly more for the second diamond Referendum Act, which is binding to not just the president, but to the parliament as well. The first batch of such referendums will happen end of this year, and this is a very co-learning process. We have another law called the Digital Communication Act that in its initial draft has the name V Taiwan written in its text. It's been since taken out to be more inclusive. Any civil society initiated multi-stakeholder open mechanism, but it means the same thing. And ironically, this is one of the laws that passed the V Taiwan process. So it's bootstrapping itself, I guess. And it's specified that this process must be used with sufficient budget and support for anything related to internet governance, which means digital issues that affects everyone, not just people in Taiwan. And so that is, again, part of the CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Pact.
Oh.
The Trans-Pacific Pact without U.S. at the moment, but maybe someday with the U.S. again. And so it's on the fast track. So if we pass it in the next few months, then we bind the administration to run this process for arbitrary issues, not just petitions and things that has ministerial and civil society energy. So yeah, we're codifying this process.
This process has been tagged onto the pact, the legislation for the pact.
That's right.
Boy, it's nice to see something tagged on to such a thing that is actually created. Here, there's all sorts of things that get stuck onto bills that have nothing to do with it, and they're horribly destructive. Anyway.
Yeah, the rationale in very simple one paragraph is there's one part in CPTPP that regulates the junk mail, right? Unsolicited advertisement, and people can click to unsubscribe. That's part of the pact. But any cross-country pact like this need to be deliberated in a way that include all the stakeholders, including the spammers. Spammers are people too. And so we need a fair deliberation mechanism, and to support that we need fundamental right, and to support that we need V Taiwan-like spaces. It's actually, it makes a lot of sense, but yeah.
I'm realizing, Miki, that your convergent facilitation is a precious resource for the second diamond.
For the second diamond, totally.
Yeah. Dynamic facilitation, other things. There's a number of things that fit really well in there. But I think the logic of convergent facilitation is particularly comfortable within the way of thinking that Audrey is expressing.
Yeah.
That's an invitation in case you don't recognize it.
Yes, I recognize it. I am. So let me explain. Convergent facilitation is a methodology that I developed. I haven't adapted it yet. I don't think I will, because I'm not a techie person. But do you know the Lumio people?
Yes, very intimately, because we used that during the Occupy.
Great. So I have talked with them, and they are now creating a mock-up of adding 2 features from convergent facilitation to Lumio. So I can, through this, introduce it. So one of them is the principle that says that people can disagree at the level of their positions or ideas or preferences or what they want, but you can reach agreement at a deeper level of underlying principles much faster than at the level of positions. So, for example, you know, in the most recently, I was using it with people from the UN and academics and International Labor Office and a few governments and all of that. And they were looking at the topic of child labor policy. And there is a huge schism within the field of child labor. I don't need to get into the details. So much so that they were some of them were very dubious about being in the same room for 3 days. For what purpose? And yet, within a few hours, we were able to come up with a list of 15 principles that they all agreed on. That if you're going to address the question of child labor, you need to give attention to these principles. And this move, I call it the non-controversial essence. And I don't have the techie thing like you do, so I'm just going to paint it in your imagination. There's a spectrum where on one side you have each person's exact specific preference of what they want in exactly the way that they want it, etc. And somewhere all the way on the other side of the spectrum, is the fundamental, very core way that each one of us wants to be aligned with life and thrive, which doesn't preclude death. Now, as you move deeper on the spectrum, you lose specificity, but you gain coherence. If you move fast enough, I'm going even deeper than core value. It's kind of a core value is a spot on the spectrum.
Okay.
If you move in the other direction, you gain information about how to solve a problem. So I created this term, I call it the non-controversial essence, which is a kind of a sweet spot that is the minimal loss of specificity that would allow controversy to disappear. And it's always there. So it's somewhere between core value and preference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So,
non-controversial essence, I call it. And so what I'm exploring now with the Lumio people is how they can add it to their platform, where there can be, like a particular board where somebody could say, hey, from what I'm hearing, from what different people are saying, I think this might be a non-controversial essence in the discussion that we're having. And if people really agree on it, then you end up having a list of things that no longer represent advocacy or disagreement. They represent the essential characteristics of the solution space. Once you have all of them, and you have a commitment to a solution that works for everyone, your search for a solution is very well defined. It speeds up a process of convergence, and it speeds up the process of trust building. So that's one of the two. I'm curious.
The link to trust is a very interesting one for him.
Oh, this is not yes, you wrote it right. Just your handwriting was a little bit. Yeah. What did you say, Tom?
I was saying, Audrey, that the trust dimension is fundamental to Audrey. The idea this is a trust building thing is also an interesting tool. And there's so much of this that I didn't realize before today that is fundamentally about the transformation of relationship. It's not just problem solving. It's a way in which the problem solving activity is, as you might put it, Audrey, an excuse for building trust.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Not.
No. Because what ends up happening is if you have ideological differences, in my experience, they won't converge. What makes it possible to converge is that people have a practical problem to solve that affects them, that they have stakes in. If they just come to talk about, the abortion debate, they won't. But if they are entrusted with coming up with a solution to the abortion divide that all of them can agree on, and they are from across the divide, but they are entrusted with policy for the country, they will converge, which is what happened in Ireland.
Yes, and this is an old idea, right? This is overlapping consensus from Rawls that says people with different ideologies converge if you present them with specifics rather than abstract.
Yes, they have a problem to solve that affects them. So it's not an excuse for relationship. It really is driven by solving a problem. It uses relationship as a tool for problem solving. It recognizes that you need relationship in order to bridge differences. That differences are not bridged on the basis of rational argumentation.
I do agree. And also the importance of food need to be injected at some point. But I do agree. No, seriously. The non-controversial essence, I think, is very insightful. I'm not very clear on how Lumio, with its discussion board voting flow, can incorporate it. I can't quite visualize it in my mind at the moment, but I visualize it as people identifying a summary of a statement that captures the essence of what's already being talked about, and people somehow commit to talk about this instead in order to find a solution space.
Let me. I can do screen share. So let me find. Give me a moment. I will find the this thing, the core principles.
Right, but you said there's two augmentations. What is the other one?
Let me just show you this.
Okay, it's easier seen.
Just so you get a sense of what these principles look like.
Yes.
So I think this would require you to get out of screen share. And
which
now, there you are.
I think.
Yeah.
And I'm no longer sharing. And it's your turn.
So I will do that. Here.
Okay.
So everybody agreed with all of these. They came. There's more. There's a couple more below. So they are significant. They're not, we believe in love, they're very significant and specific, but they are just below actual policy. Do you see?
They seem coherent also.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, so for Lumio, I'm thinking methodologically. Because
Audrey, you will need to talk with us about it because I don't actually know what they're going to do technologically.
Okay. Yes.
They were very excited and they wanted.
Okay. But what I'm trying to say is that all the 16 points, they're coherent. They're surprisingly coherent. So do they arise by having 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then finally 16, with the criteria that the new ones added to the list must not be logically paradoxical with the ones already on the list, or do they surface it some other way?
Just about any application, they can surface in a different way. In this particular case, the facilitator team came up with a draft based on things that we heard from people.
Okay.
And we presented it to them. We presented, I think, 8.
Okay.
And, there were tweaks and then there were additions that came from the group. In this particular case. In other cases, people are saying, we should do this and 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 we should do this. And then I come back and say, this is what I believe is important in what you're saying. And I add it only when I feel in my gut that it's actually going to be non-controversial.
I see. So the non-controversy is a value that is held in the facilitator's mind.
Yes. Because
the group can take that on also, but the facilitator is a source of that. And
the most interesting cases are cases where you actually need 2 different principles that are in dynamic tension with each other in order to achieve non-controversy. Where either one of these will leave someone unsettled. But if you add the other one, because they're in dynamic tension, they're going to be fine.
Okay, right. Just drawing this little Tai Chi here. Okay, right. So yes.
That's the one component. And the other one is the aim of this process is a solution that is acceptable to all. That really works for everyone. Now, that's not the same as consensus. It has, I would say, like a 90% overlap with consensus, but not 100.
Did you read the material on rough consensus?
Yes.
I'm wondering if it's closer to that.
I don't have it integrated enough to be able to do the mapping. It was interesting to read. There is a similarity in terms of attending to all concerns and integrating them and evolving the solution or evolving the principles, depending whatever you need to do. But at a certain point, as the facilitator, to ask the question, some version of the question, is everyone okay with it? It turns out that how you ask the question has different results. So I will illustrate it dramatically, because I would never use either one of these, but it's again a spectrum. On one end, I can ask, is anybody going to kill themselves if we adopt this decision? And of course, that has so little room for discussion, because when I think, no, I'm not going to kill myself. I'm going to be super unhappy. I'm going to hate them. I'm going to be resentful, but I'm not going to kill myself. So you can get a decision this way always, but it's not really something that engaged the people. And then all the way on the other end of it is there even one letter in this proposed decision that anybody has even the slightest discomfort anywhere in you? And of course, if you ask it at that level, you will never reach a decision, right? Because there's always going to be something that's going to be uncomfortable for someone. And you're not trying to make everybody happy. So there's an art and a skill to finding the question, what is the threshold at which you are inviting dissent? But what it has in common in an odd way with polis is that it invites dissent. It doesn't create pressure to agree. It invites dissent. It's just a question of how much. So does anybody have concerns? Will raise more discussion than if you say, does anybody have significant concerns? Or if you ask, does anybody have concerns that you believe will actually impair our capacity to function if we adopt it. So there are different levels, and choosing the right threshold to ask changes things. So as you invite more concerns, ultimately, theoretically, you can have a more powerful decision because it has incorporated more dissent, more concerns, but you are wiping people out because the process of engaging with dissent is very taxing. So it's a sweet spot. That's it. Those are the two kind of like core innovations. And there's a sequence, there's a process, all of that. You don't really need to know more about it in the moment, but these are the two specific things. And the second one, I think the way that Lumio people will integrate it is that there will be a possibility for to have kind of like a drop-down menu of threshold questions. And the person who asks can choose which one, and each installation, they can create their own threshold menu. That's what I'm hoping they will do, but I don't know. I used to be a computer programmer probably before you were born. But I don't know. I don't know when you were born, but I was programming until 1989.
Okay, that's the year I learned programming when I was 8 years old. So maybe I picked up from you, but yes.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I was working on IBM mainframes, so I'm completely useless and not interested in programming anymore. But I have that that kind of sensibility stays with me.
I still, I worked on IBM mainframes too, and AIX after that. But that's a very different conversation. So yes, I think our methodologies are very compatible. There's a genuine insight in that you can pick from the interface from any suicides to any one-letter changes. I think this is a real insight because that kind of democratizes the humming volume threshold to everyone in the room. Whereas before it is a social norm, and so people get accustomed to a certain threshold. I think this is a genuine insight.
Thank you.
Yeah. Everything else feels very familiar.
Great.
Yeah. And I also want to come back to Tom's point, because if we start from a time zone, a time feeling that spans 7 generations, right? Then all these are, like as Leonard Cohen says, right, cracks in everything. That's how the light gets in. Preferably the crack is of a certain shape so the light can shine through and maybe make a rainbow or something, but it's all part of the draw so that people can come to the co-intelligent process. And in this view, all these spectrums and issues and whatever are really just excuses. But when there is a much shorter time span, like there's climate change, we need to stop it in 5 years, we need to agree on something, otherwise we'd better start sending out spaceships, then we don't have the luxury of this building trust across generation worldview. So what I'm saying is that it's really the same process. It's just how zoomed in or out you are on the time scale. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I want to say that for you signed up for 6 hours. I didn't.
Okay.
I want to. I want to find a. I don't need to leave right now, but I have many other things on my plate, and I also want to go to sleep at some point. So I would like to move towards closure of my presence here.
Yes.
I don't know if there's anything that anybody wants for me or from me, but I'm open to hear if there are any open threads.
In terms of getting to know you, the 2 points that I'm thinking of, I mean, there's the big thing of nonviolent communication, which is a major piece of your life, and but there's the 2 things that I see particularly connecting to Audrey's world is your PhD thesis and your stories on willingness as a foundational thing. Those are the bringing of emotion into sociology, and the interesting way you went about trying to do that in your thesis is what I want. It feels like I could summarize it in 2 minutes, but it would be probably scream, no. So those things should come out of your mouth rather than mine.
I think part of it is, to be completely honest, I am not seeing the link, so I don't know what to speak to. It's more like I would be doing it because you're asking me to.
Why don't Tom spend 2 minutes and let's hear the screaming.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Oh boy. Anyway, I have never read the whole thesis, but I talked a bunch with Miki about it, and I've read pieces of it. And what I got, in essence, is Miki was looking at the founding men, they're all men, of sociology, and, Marx and Veblen and these guys, and none of them dealt with emotion as a factor in their theories. And she's going, wait a minute, you're talking about the dynamics of society and you're not including emotion? There's something fundamentally wrong with this. And she tried to do her thesis both in with a rational discipline, academic discipline, and with emotion, trying to model what would sociology look like if it did take, here's an example of a sociological study if you did take emotion seriously. So that's my quickie summary.
I will add to it, there's nothing wrong with what you said, I'm not screaming, but I will add to it that for me it is deeper than sociology. For me it is the entire patriarchal Western civilization rests on the assumption that rationality, disembodied rationality, is what makes humans humans, and a kind of like negation of nature, of emotion, of relationship, of embeddedness, all of that. And so I was aiming to integrate, to offer a model that would integrate rationality and emotions into a larger, more coherent whole.
I'm wondering why you wrote Universal Human Needs, Audrey. Have you
because I was going through the material, right? The Bay NYC material 10 years ago. Identifies
I can't quite comprehend how your mind works, your mind, body, whatever, anyway.
Right, right.
The NVC, nonviolent communication, is Miki is one of the, if not the, in my opinion, leading practitioners and trainers. She's embedded in it. She's a master. Lots of people doing nonviolent communication follow a very rote kind of thing, which is powerful in itself. You can do rote things powerfully. But sometimes Miki does it when you can't even tell she's doing it. It's just a very smooth thing, and it does delve farther into the thing, into the where life energy and motivations and orientations and meaning come from.
Yes, and there is you're flattening it to a doing. For me, it's a way of being.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Like I say. There's a source of life energy. There's a level of human life that is a source of where life energy comes from. And then the word needs is an effort to sort of put a tag on that. And people can do it in attempt to evoke that dimension of life from somebody else and work their way towards, well, how's that going to play out in the way that works for everybody in this situation? And you can live from that place, which is, I think, what Miki's.
And there's something there's a practice that I do that relates to what you were talking about in terms of the luxury and we don't have time. Mm-hmm. A while back, I was part of the project that most NVC people are still in that project of let's train enough people in NVC, reach a critical mass, and then the world will change. And from my perspective, considering the stressors that the world is in and the number of people that are born faster than we can even catch up with them to feed them, let alone train them, that's a losing project. So I'm looking for interventions that are much faster. And so, for example, I can give you an example of 2 questions that instantly raise people's level of function. It doesn't necessarily stay there when you go away, but you can, let's say, work with the group, raise their level of function, get them to connect with each other, build trust, make a decision, anchor it in action, and then even if they revert to lower level function, the action will sustain them over time. That's a faster way to move. So I'm looking for these kind of like key phrases or principles or questions. One of them is this simple question: what is a solution that's going to work for everyone? And I literally see when I ask people that question, whether it's a group or even an individual, I see their eyes look to a different place. It's something changes in their body. They move from I to we in a way that is really amazing. And they start looking for different solutions. That's one such question. Another one is, what is most important here? Another one is, what's the real purpose? So you can come up with such questions that kind of like guide people's attention. And attention is the most precious resource that we have of all. Where we put our attention and what we do with our attention. So that's I think plenty. What I can do is I can send you I have like a 3 or 4 condensed version of my dissertation. If Tom is right and some of it will interest you, you will then be able to tell me chapter 2 and chapter 7, please. And then I will send them to you.
He'll get it read in a half hour, not a problem.
Right. Is that the little book of Courageous Living?
No. It's not on the website. It's
not on the website.
It was never published.
Well, then I would not have read it. So yes. So you've moved from Gospels to koans, which I think is awesome. Right. And I think I have just one clarifying question. So in our recursive public, which we call GAP0, we really consciously bring technologies into it that adds to the recursiveness. And open space technology, OST, and nonviolent communication, NVC, are the 2 labels that we actually use.
You're using NVC?
Yes, these are the 2 main monikers we add to our recursive public. We try to, and I have to admit that NVC is of lesser importance than the OST.
That doesn't surprise me, because most people who will introduce it to you will not introduce it in a way that you will see relevance and applicability.
Yes, and I now, after seeing this picture, I think I see how more recursiveness and less instrumentality, I think that's the English, it could be as part of the integration. So thank you for that. But my clarifying question is, when you start with those koans, like solution for all, things we can all live with, most important or most purpose, do you always want people to think about it and share it? Or do you just want people to contemplate it and go on doing whatever the process there is? Because it's two very different facilitation methods.
Yes. I am appreciating the question very much. I think it depends on the application.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But overall, I think that knowing what question to ask is one of the most important interventions that we can do as humans trying to create change.
Right. So it's in the evocation itself. It's in the awareness level. It's not necessarily in whatever gets written down. You do it only if you have to, or the application calls for it.
Questions are not there to be answered.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. And so one of the points of the questions that I ask is to raise people's level of function, even if momentarily. The other is to, they overlap, they intersect, but the other purpose that I have is to get people out of the obvious, the thinking that what is happening is obviously the only thing that could happen.
One could say questions open space. They put it on a space instead of a point.
Right. It de-anchors people. Yeah. That I'm completely fine with. Thank you. So yes, I think we're on the same page.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I will be very happy anytime you have a specific question about, if there's this situation and from an NBC perspective, what can you do with it? Very happy to, just send me a quick email and I can send you a quick email back.
Awesome. Thank you. And vice versa. Yeah. If at any time you want, a consultation about applied Taoism to politics, then we can talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tom, for making this possible. It was very pleasurable.
Thank you for introducing me to Audrey. Thank you for poking your head into the possibility of being in this call. You've been absolutely essential to how it's unfolded, and I love the fact that you were here.
Thank you. And your generosity of spirit, Tom, is very touching. And Audrey, I am in awe of how you manage to take things that are so significant and with such big potential and be so lighthearted and fun about it. Wow. Thank you.
It's fun. It's fun.
He can't help himself.
Exactly. It's just a lot of fun.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye. So I'm not quite ready to leave. Even though I don't have anything specific yet. I would like to do a quick intro to dynamic facilitation for you, since I refer to it a number of times, and it's my sort of jewel in the crown of process. And I will love to have a conversation sometime with you with Rosa Zubizarreta, for whom we have the Tao of Democracy to thank. Pulled it out of me. And I got her into dynamic facilitation, and she then wrote her master's thesis about why it works, which was very instructive for me, although I had taken courses in it and read about it and all that. Her description is fascinating. And she says, and the facilitator is very dominant in dynamic facilitation, especially early on. And you need to have people who are in some kind of conflict. I mean, to the extent they're in conflict, there's something to work with. And if they aren't in conflict at all, the founder of dynamic facilitation, Jim Ruff, some of us got him to come and talk to people who were on the board of the fellowship, the Fellowship of Intentional Communities, who were largely trained in consensus process. And he did several hours with them, and he got frustrated. He says, don't you people care about anything? Because you're all being so considerate of the larger goal of what other people think. And he couldn't get any traction. It was very funny and frustrating and instructive moment. Anyway, Rosa says that as facilitator, she is the designated listener. That the people come in drunk on their own ideas and can't really hear each other. So she is going to be the designated listener. And so it starts out with, so who has something they want to say about this thing we're here to talk about? And somebody raises their hand, so okay, tell me about it. And she does, the dynamic facilitation facilitator does their goal is to have that person feel fully heard. And there are usually these 4 chart pads with problem statements, possible solutions, concerns, and data. And so the facilitator is taking what the person's saying, going, oh, look, let me see if I'm getting that, and they're repeating it back, but not word for word, not rotely. They're trying to get it. What's the essence of what this person's saying? And with the emotion, all the emotion that's in it is part of it also. They're stepping into that person's universe so that person feels companioned in their world with zero judgment. They're just trying to really be there with that person. They're writing stuff down on the chart pads, whichever one is right, going, am I getting this right? It's an inquiry. It's not what you're saying is. There's nothing like that. It's like, am I getting this right? And the person goes, no, it's more like this. Okay, da-da-da-da. So this is back and forth going on. And the fully heardness has a psychological and physiological reaction in people. When they feel fully heard, the fight and flight response kind of evaporates. The withdrawal, the pushing their ideas, all that just disappears, and they're just there. And simultaneously, everybody has heard what they had to say. They watched it being put up on the board, on the chart pads. So it's in there in the collective space, again, with no judgment attached to it. And they've also watched an idealized form of listening being modeled. And then somebody else, she does the same thing to somebody else. And they have their turn is totally, it takes as long as it takes. And it's totally, the space is being held by the facilitator. And if somebody suddenly chimes in while she's doing this with somebody, goes, no, that's full of shit, she turns to them and says, hold on, I'll get to you in a minute. And when she turns to them, she says, what's your concern? Give it to me. So their negative energy is translated into a concern, which is a valuable piece of information for the group. So it goes up on the chart pads. And am I getting this right? Back to the reflective listening thing. And each time for each person who isn't automatically giving a solution, they'll get, like the person with the concern. Once she gets a concern, she goes, okay, so what do you think ought to be done about that? There's a little turn towards a solution, and it goes up on the possible solutions. And again, reflective listening is happening. And if somebody goes, well, I don't know what should be done, the facilitator might say something like, if you were king of the world, what would you do? Like, if you knew what should be done, what would that be? Sort of to keep on poking at it. And so that what is happening to the group is that when they walked in the room, they were looking at a particular frame, a particular context, a particular lens, a piece of the whole that they were really attached to. Now they've listened to all these other pieces of the whole, and it has produced what we in the business call the mess. The mess is now in the collective space. It's up there on the chart pads that have been stuck on the wall, all those individual sheets, and the facilitator might occasionally do a review of what's gone up there so far, sort of shove the mess in people's faces. And then there's a phenomenon that happens that is key to Rosa's thesis, her master's thesis, is that there's a shift that happens in the group where the group is now, everybody's kind of been opened up, and they're now looking at the mess. And there's a compulsion in people to make sense. So begins to emerge a collective energy desperate to make sense of the mess. And people start to say things like, what if we blah, blah, blah? It's like the we language starts to come up, and it's sort of proposals start to pop up for other people to consider. And there's a brainstormy kind of energy that starts to come out. And again, and at that point, the facilitator stops doing the reflective listening. They're just doing chart pad, recording stuff on chart pads. And then in the midst of that, somebody go, no, that's really stupid. We shouldn't. And she'll go, give it to me. What's your concern? At that point, she steps in. There's this occasional interventions and reflective listening when the energy gets stopped. And then as people start popping up with these, this gets into a kind of conversation that Jim Ruff, who created this, calls choice creating, which is when we're all together working on the problem. It's no longer one piece against another piece. The whole group is working on the whole problem and sensing into it. And when they're in that mode, if it's given sufficient time, there's almost always some kind of breakthrough. And sometimes the breakthrough is in a solution where somebody goes, oh, we could do blah, blah, blah. And there's sort of the group goes, there's a collective aha, a recognition that this is, as a Native American guy said once, it's like we talk until there's nothing left but the obvious truth. So it's, there's a settling into this. And there's other kinds of breakthrough, like people going, we're looking at this all wrong. And there's a shift to a different perspective, a different level of system or thinking about it, which reframes the whole thing. And it's almost like starting again in a new space. And of course, there's relational shifts. If these people were at each other's throats before, they're no longer that way. They're in the space creating solutions together. And it's totally nonlinear and emergent. It's in the class of emergent processes because you can't get from A to B. That's not what's going on. There's a loosening up and freeing up of life energy to address the collective. So that's the quick intro to how DF works. And it's one of these things that's very simple and very hard. It's like the counting your breath thing. All you got to do is breathe and watch your breathing. So simple, but it's to be a master facilitator. There's a kind of presence and a kind of flowing with the energy of the group and how things are shifting. And, you may notice somebody sitting with their arms crossed and you realize that's energy. You're following the energy of the group. You go after them, not just the person who's jumping up and down. There's all different kinds of energy. Anyway, so the more conflict there is, the more juice, the more energy there is. conflict is life energy, and dynamic facilitation recognizes and utilizes that. And I see this as a close cousin of Miki's stuff, and of getting to yes. Principled negotiation is a somewhat more linear version of that. But again, it's trying to get at underneath where people are thinking and reacting to each other. There's powerful common ground. It's not just common ground. There's power in that, life energy in that. So the two in my pattern language, after I had come up with these 70 patterns, and I kept wanting to put more, and the guy who was working with me said, "You got to stop somewhere." So he stopped me at 70, and then I needed to figure out the related patterns, because that's part of. Are you familiar with pattern languages in general?
Yes, design patterns is a very important part.
There's a practice called pattern languages. Yes. Pattern language.
Yes. Well, I read most of the pages linking to and linked from the co-intelligence org page on dynamic facilitation, so you can assume.
Oh, okay. So you're already having.
It's in my mind, and while you were talking, I also read the 2006 manual on dynamic facilitation. So you can also assume that the background information.
I can't keep up with you.
No. It's me trying to catch up with you. It's work happened 10 years ago.
To get here. I give you minutes. Anyway. So the original pattern language was on communities that have this magical quality, and all sorts of other pattern languages have been made. And I was part of creating a pattern language for group process, how to have juicy, productive, exciting, interesting, loving group process. And the woman who developed that, Sri Bresson, actually with tremendous collaboration from lots of other people, created the idea of having these cards and designing the cards with a picture, a little 50-word statement, and connected patterns, related patterns. And so I was going to model my pattern language after that, and I did. But you have to have that the connected. And because it's on a card, I mean, there's infinite connections between patterns in a pattern language, but you can only put like 7 of them on a card. So I made this big chart pad. Given the nature of this call, I think I will see if I. Oh yeah, here it goes. I think. There's this chart pad. I'm a paper guy. Has all the 70 by 70, all the patterns across the top, all the patterns down the side. And so I go across marking them with different levels of how related I think they are for several days. And then I couldn't have 10, I couldn't have 3. I had to make sure there were 7 in each row that had the top ranking. And then it occurred to me, I should see how many times each of them was listed as a related pattern. So I added up the columns instead of the rows. And I discovered 2 of them stood out way beyond all the others. They had like 24 and 26 connections. The next lowest was like 14. And they were the using diversity and disturbance creatively and well-utilized life energy. And I thought that was really interesting until later on, several months later, I realized they're intimately related. That if you invite life energy into a space, use it, you will get diversity and disturbance. So needing to be able to use that creatively is a powerful skill.
Mm-hmm.
And I see, and that's fundamental to what's going on in this, in the Wise Democracy work, is how do we collectively utilize primarily diversity and disturbance, because they have lessons. And I recognized that as going on in Taiwan and in the software, and it's in Miki's thing, it's in dynamic facilitation. It's like these are the master practices for doing that. And I don't know, you've probably read everything on the Wise Democracy Pattern Language website, but you know,
not yet, maybe 1/5, but yes.
You probably noticed each pattern, although they're presented in many different ways, each pattern has its own page. The video that is on the page is because the guy that was working with me, Martin Rausch, who one day just called me and said, "Hey, would you like some help developing a pattern language on Wise Democracy?" And I was off and running instantly with that request, and he was absolutely essential to getting that out of me. It would have taken me 5-10 years to do it by myself. But after I wrote these little, 50-word descriptions, which Tree Bresson calls the heart of the pattern. And then Martin, while we're on Zoom, he's in Switzerland, Martin says, "Why did you describe it that way?" And I talked about why I described it that way, and he recorded it on Zoom, and that's the video that's on the pages. And then he transcribed, somebody else who transcribes things, he transcribed the video, what I said in the video, and then I edited the transcriptions, and that's the big essay that's on each one. And then I gave him this part of my story, he asked me what kind of picture would be good for each pattern. And so I gave him some words to describe what kind of picture. He went and got pictures. And after he'd gotten the picture for all the patterns, he had me go through and rate the pictures on a scale of 0 to 10. And then any picture that had less than a 5 or 5 or less, he found another picture. So that everything had more than 5 on it, which is just like, that's the quality of the site, all the website layout. You compare that site to the Co-Intelligence Institute site, and you're in a different ballgame, I don't know how you do all this stuff, but you do.
Yeah, well, I just added to the picture well utilized life energy, just by taking a screenshot of us talking.
And I want to place your stuff somewhere in the pattern language, but I'm going to have to really do some digestion, because it is a different order of thing than the other examples and resources that I've put in here. Plus, I would probably, if I do a version 2, which I'd like to do sometime this year, it'll be influential in, I don't know, it's a funny way my mind works the way it works, and I'm 71 years old, and okay, it's worked enough that I can recognize sort of what you're doing, but I don't operate in that world natively, and you fascinate me partly because you're an obvious native. You live in this different world that I understand aspects of, but and intuit. I do a lot of my work intuitively, and then translating it to ideas and words and stuff. The intuitions are fundamental, and I recognize that's part of when I met Nora. It was, I saw somebody who recognized the deepest levels of co-intelligence that hardly anybody else I work with recognizes. They're operating at a different level, but she did something totally different with it than I did. It fascinated me. And I come here and I find I didn't recognize you and the Taiwan stuff on its own terms until this conversation started. I had to look through the lens of citizen deliberative councils and stuff like that, and try to get policies and blah, blah, blah. and how separate that was from open space. There is the creation of policies, and then there's self-organization activity, and you sort of, they're both now woven together seamlessly, and on top of that, it's fun, yeah,
exactly.
I don't tend to put the fun part in. You put it right in the middle. Anyway, I had 3 chapters on why the Tao democracy was Taoistic at the end of the book, but Rosa chopped the book. She got me to write it, and then she said it's too long, and you have to cut out 2/3 of it. Okay. So there's only a couple of references to Tao Te Ching in there, but the key one is that the leader leads well when the people say they did it themselves. And the idea of action and no action, I may have lots of philosophy about what that means, but I have not seen anybody who comes close to doing that the way you do. So, whoa, has this guy got that down? Anyway, so.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to go through the cards. I was a player of a card game called Magic: The Gathering.
Oh, yeah.
And it was very popular among teenagers here back in 1997 or something, 98. And
I
that's
live in
how
a co-op house with young people, and they every now and then pull out the Magic.
That's right, and that's how I learned English. So my first vocabularies of English are very complex things, like abeyance, or right, like things that people won't usually use, but because there's so many magic cards, annihilation, right? They have to find new synonyms for the same spell. So my vocabulary is very weird when I started learning English. But I like the pictures and how they convey a contextual thing on which these very complex words can be used, because otherwise they're just complex words, right? The picture really captures the context, the association possibility of the terms. So I really like the way the WDPL, the West Democracy site is organized. I think it's intuitively, it's not sequential in the way that it asks people to apply it as a toolkit. But of course, if you have a strong need to pull something useful, you can do that too. But the website is not pressuring the viewer to do this. And I tend to think the same of Taiwan. But the thing with international media is that they have a narrative. Detailing is usually just one section or one paragraph or one part of the larger narrative. So necessarily they extract the one example that fits the narrative and run with it, which we're okay too. I mean, we relinquish copyright for this very purpose, right? Anyone can say they did it themselves, and we won't sue them. But yeah, that's the core logic of Gov0, right? It's not just you can take any government website and change the O to a 0 to get a shadow government, but also it echoes the idea of the Creative Commons 0, which is an explicit waiver of copyright, including attribution right and personal right. That is to say, people can say.
I ran across somebody who I stumbled on an article of mine that wasn't on any of my websites, and it was on this consultant's website with his name as the author. And I went, wow, he's carrying my words on. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're all just, vehicles, that the patterns inhabit. So ownership is a silly idea. And so, anyway, so what I'm trying to associate to is maybe it is not so much that the space is essential in connecting life energy towards diversity. I try to think space as, because you see, when space are understood in a topological way, people usually think space is something that has like agora, right? It has boundary. It has the space where the space is in. It has a certain notion of dimensionality, like Taipei is part of Taiwan and so on. And now that, and speaking as a young migrant to the internet, the internet is having its own logic, right? It's like people who feel the same way in all those three spaces, they form a tribe and try to recruit more people into this tribe, which forms a link graph that is related because the space still provides safety, security, food, bandwidth to the link graph. But the link graph also appropriates resources and try to create spaces even when there are none, like through Occupy, which essentially says we want the space to carry the logic of our network. And so I think it is in the dynamic exchange between the link graph and the space graph that these diversities are organized creatively. And there's a mathematical part of this language based on category theory, but this is how my mind sees the connections and life energy.
Something tells me that Nora will understand that better than I will. She has a list of about 15 different scientific principles or theories that you need to understand before you can name what's called a station in her warm data labs.
Okay.
And I go, this is unnecessarily complexifying it, but I don't know, And then Bertrand Russell's levels of categories is one of her things. Anyway, space to me doesn't necessarily have boundaries, and there's space is space. Again, it's one of those things I have an intuition for, and the words don't. A bounded space is a specific kind of space, but it's like a realm. The word realm I use a lot. I have a colleague. I have lots of colleagues. I have a colleague who used to be a Christian fundamentalist minister who passed out anti-evolution tracts, and then he got converted to the science-based story of evolution as our sacred, the formation, creation story. From the Big Bang till now, and he totally reframed Christianity in science-based evolutionary terms. So God is reality, and facts are God's native tongue, and stuff like that. You got to get right with reality, get right with God, and it make consequences. It was really interesting. And he wrote a book called "Thank God for Evolution." And he has a website, thankgodforevolution.com. His name is Michael Dowd. And I became a close colleague of his for several years, and became finally unsatisfied with his work, where it was limited by not having enough about activism. And to me, one of the language of people like Michael Dowd is we are evolution becoming conscious of itself. We are the universe looking at itself through telescopes, all these sort of inversions. And if we are evolution becoming conscious of itself, then all our efforts to change conditions in the world are directly tied back to the Big Bang. I mean, all this whole thrust of evolution. And that the great grandmama of all activism is the evolutionary process, and we better learn from great grandmama, not ignore her. So that's my Reflections on Evolutionary Activism book, is what would it mean to try to learn from evolution and not just be evolutionary agents, but take on that identity of being the evolutionary process. What does that mean? And one of the things when I was studying evolution, which connects back to the space thing, and like the invention of video games created a realm within which evolution happens. You know, the creation of language creates a realm. It's like this branching off. We're really good at creating new realms for evolution to unfold. And they're not necessarily physical. These are virtual spaces. Language is a virtual space, you know. And then new varieties, you know, we co-intelligence, the new words, like a new species is slowly shown up in the ecosystem of language, you know. And that's another kind of space. And that thing that I mentioned earlier when Miki was on of questions, and there's a whole page on the Co-Intelligence Institute website if you want to poke in it and instantly see it with a bunch of links about questions. And the idea that questions have power, and questions can have linear power or nonlinear power, in the sense of questions that open space, where you're directing attention, but you're directing it to a space, not a point. Questions that have answers, you know, what's 4 times 4 is directing you to a point. But like the World Cafe people, you're familiar with World Cafe?
Oh, yeah.
So that's
Very
another one of the powerful nonlinear processes. And they are masters. I have a list of people, Quakers and Fran Peavy and, you know, the World Cafe. World Cafe people are brilliant. And one of my favorite, what I call zipper questions, is you can put all sorts of things into it. It's like, what could this conversation also be? You know, what could V Taiwan also be? What could governance also be? It's like just you plug in different things, and it takes you. They did it. They made that first with a school that was having all these problems, and instead of addressing the problems, they had them do a World Cafe on what could this school also be. You know, it's like boing. You know, you're outside of the whole frame of reference instantly. You know, so yeah, and that brings me to another piece, which you probably already read my blog post on. I'm predicting now how you behave. You're so predictable. You've already done everything.
or about to.
So the network governance, multi-sector, multi-stakeholder, multi-scale networks collaborating is an emerging form of governance. And I realize this overlaps totally with your stuff. You are practicing it in a very dynamic way. But this Tracy Kunkler is a consultant. Yes, that's the MS3 stuff. Tracy Kunkler is a consultant largely with networks that are involved with food systems in Appalachia. And she wrote a little blog post noting that she was seeing like the farmers have their networks, and and consumers and groceries have their networks, and the government regulators have their networks, and they were all working together to evolve food systems across boundaries of states, you know. And she was going, this is an emerging form of governance. And several weeks later, another colleague, Nancy White, do you know Nancy White?
No.
She's an online facilitator and does graphic facilitation online.
Yeah, I think I heard of the name, but not intimately familiar.
She referred me to a guy named Steve Waddell, who had been working for years and written several books on it, and he was noting that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, every one of them is gathering around it multi-sector, multi-stakeholder, multi-scale networks that are trying to collaborate. And they don't necessarily know how to do that. And sometimes they're, big players like multinational corporations or government people will try to take over and try and get everybody else to do what they want. And other ones are much more peer-based. But that's sort of new. That level of collaboration across that level of difference is new. And so there's a lot of exploration there. And that's happening. There's hundreds of these happening all over the world. And the idea of we ended up talking, I connected up Tracy and Steve, and we ended up talking like every week on Zoom for months. And then we did a session at a conference on democratic innovations, which out of 200 people at the conference, 7 people came to our session.
Well, it allows for a deeper conversation.
Yes, but those 7 people, when asked, what are you observing and what's needed, they say, it's a struggle trying to work together. And I'm thinking, we have such incredible tools to work together. If that's your problem, there's a match made in heaven here. So out of all that stuff is emerging a thing currently, ENGI, Emerging Network Governance Initiative, that Tracy, who is a very good organizer, Steve is supporting Tracy to leave some of her consulting to ENGI, Emerging Network.
ENGI, okay.
Network governance.
Okay.
Yeah. And Steve, Tracy has, we're going through very step-by-step kinds of organizing, which I don't know how to do. I'm sort of along for the ride. And we just did, have you ever heard of Three Horizons practice?
Three Horizons.
Three Horizons. Three Horizons is, the way things are now is Horizon 1 and the things you don't like about it. The way
McKinsey idea is something like that. It's a idea. It looks like this.
No.
So it's not there. Okay.
I can't. There is a visual, but it's the first horizon. There are 3 curves. The first horizon is a curve that starts high and goes a little higher and then goes down. This is the way things are is going to die off. So and the second horizon goes up over it, overlaps the first. As it's going down, the second horizon, which is things you're doing to change things, it rises up and then sort of levels off. And horizon 3 rises from sort of the middle and goes way up. That's the world that you want.
Okay.
So there are exercises. I mean, I could take you to an illustration. They do a whiteboard an online whiteboard with online Post-it notes. They ask us questions like, what is it about the way governance is now that you can't stand? And we all wrote our answers to those for questions for Horizon 1. And Horizon 2 is, what goes to Horizon 3 next? Like, what's the world look like that you want? If you really achieved your purposes, what would it look like? And so we wrote our answers to that kind of thing. And then what needs to happen for that to happen? What are existing things and things that need to be initiated, et cetera. And that's the Horizon 2. And that's more. I don't have this. And so they reduced our answers to Post-it notes that they put on the Horizon charts. First they put them all in a big circle a big rectangle, and we had to collectively sort them into groups, our little answers. And then we had one, and that was very frustrating because the Post-it notes kept flying out of the group you were trying to collect them into because somebody else moved them. And then once we settled on the clusters, then we had to agree collectively on Zoom what to name the clusters. And all that was laid on the three horizons. Then there's another level of abstraction where the clusters are pulled out and laid along the three horizons, and feedback, and then the clusters are clustered. The cluster names are clustered, and feedback loops are drawn between these different dimensions of each of these things, showing how they support each other, block each other, whatever. And they said, then that's your narrative. That's the narrative of what your group is trying to do, is what's that thing over time. And you need to use that to create texts or videos or whatever to tell people about what you're doing. That was a really interesting exercise. It took months of every other week meetings to do that. And that's sort of where stage we're at. And we're in the process, and there's a small group that has been researching case studies, different networks that are working together in specific places, doing specific things. And we'll be looking for money, blah, 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 blah. But it's just another fact that these networks are trying to work together, and they're working on real world problems, and they're cross-sector. It's like, once again, I look at your stuff and go, that's a manifestation of this in a very different way than we've been envisioning it. But exactly the same energy, or you can frame it in those terms. I mean, it's all sorts of how do we collectively, co-intelligently, wisely do our work together on the ground to get stuff to happen. And they're doing a variation of it. So there's like a number of things I'm involved in where this is another form of that has things to say big time, because whenever we have linear things we're trying to do, it's going to take too much time. It's got to be nonlinear. And that's the impulse that I bring, which has probably too much linearity and seriousness for you, but it's like, you're onto something. Actually, you're not on it. You're in it. You're into something. And
yeah, I'm right here.
And I want.
Yeah. Okay.
In terms of development goals. Yeah. Well, there was a big thing with tons of money attached to it on global governance. Did you run across that thing? A contest for global governance that had $1 million guaranteed to the winner of the thing.
Yes. I've heard of it. Yeah.
I can't think in those terms, and I have zero. We're one of the few truly international cross-cultural engagements I've had. I'm so American, Western, white guy kind of pathetic.
Yeah, it's the global governance challenge or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So when I looked at your stuff and all the things I wrote in that 10-page thing, which I'm not embarrassed about, it was my adolescence, a developmental stage. That there's something really important about what you're doing, and I'm not even sure I'm built to recognize it, partly because of your relaxed, fun center of gravity, which is not, I enjoy having fun, but fun is not the center. And I've had to work because other people, like the exuberance card, when I was doing my evolutionary stuff, I actually have on my wall in front of me, I had to sort of force myself to think about life energy, the centrality of life energy, And what is the evolutionary process through which exuberance came to be in all of its manifestations? What's this? You stick with natural selection. If you don't have new exuberance as the core thing that's happening, but you just stick with natural selection, how did exuberance is wasteful, you know? So like, I'm going, how did it survive? It's like all the research on how collaboration came to be when it's a dog-eat-dog world, blah, blah, blah. So I have to work at that part of it. There are other people who feel that kind of fun life energy, the arts and all that, needs to be central. It is central. And most of the manifestations that I see of that, I see being used in sort of maintaining privilege. Sort of like, we're going to be having fun and happy in our conference and doing all these enjoyable things. And I go, hey, there's business to get down to. And in the meantime, people are dying and things are being destroyed. So what the fuck? And it feels like we're here to enjoy ourselves energy rather than there's something fundamental and core about it. And I bump into yours, and it is fundamental and core. I recognize that totally in who you are and how you describe what's happening. And I go, what this is, I don't know. Theoretically, I know exactly what it is, but at a gut sense, I don't have it. So when I go, how do we spread this? How does this, it's not even spread. How does this, it's a dandelion, you know, how does this take seed, discover where is the place to drop down and sprout and flourish? Because it's got to be that kind of energy. It's not a, there's things to do to facilitate it, to catalyze it, whatever, but it's not a tree planting operation. There's something far more organic, and I don't know what it is. And I hope this conversation and video, at least, you know, as it bumps into people who go, oh yeah, I know what he's talking about. Tom doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground, you know, that maybe this will help that get planted somewhere. But I'm, once again, I had, with Samathasy, I had to do a major turn my head around to center myself in her world. And I'm feeling a similar kind of, I need to absorb this. I need to watch this video 5 or 10 times and absorb this energy and become a different person to be able to see through the eyes that you see through, which I can't ever do because I'm not living in the world that you are with the history you have, but I need to, since this is my life passion, I need to figure out how to take on this thing that you have created and are living in. So,
yeah. Before I even know I will do any public policy work, I gave this talk about, it's called Open Source Enlightenment. And it's not even my talk. It's one of my dear friends, Ellison Randall, who's president of the Open Source Initiative, the bunch of people who did this open source thing by convincing people like the old Netscape or now Microsoft and Google and everyone to partially or completely abandon their copyright so people can have fun together. And so we had to make this whole culture for it. And so she went to Taipei and gave a talk. And I did a real-time transcription, and then I added some more pictures, and it turned into a different talk. And so, yeah, one of the slides or the cards I have is optimizing for fun. And yeah, I think it's a more fun than the person jumping here.
Kidding. No fucking kidding.
Yeah,
who has the copyright on this picture?
Yeah, it's on Flickr, so I actually linked back to the Flickr, which again use Creative Commons. The photographer shares her copyright. Yeah, but the fine print, there is a fine print to this picture, right? You need a stable support. You need a safe space. You need a priori unconstrained of the activities. And finally, you need to be accepting of new ways of looking at the world. It can't just be reinforcing the status quo, which would be privilege as you describe it. So I think there's a world of abundance that programmers take for granted in the past decade or so, because it really costs nothing to copy a web page. And the abundance is felt strongly because the software are developed in a way, and we have a word for that. It's called CRDT, and it stands for the mathematical concept of a conflict-free, replicated or replicable, replicated data type. So what this means mathematically is that whatever I do in my open source work, I can feel comfortable to let other people to take to new directions, but it will cost us almost nothing to merge our respective contributions into something new. And historically, this part of the diamond is very expensive. It's expensive not in the money sense, but in the you have to have a designated listener that's on par of the two forks sense. If the facilitator has to understand the language, and if the system's fork diverge too much, there is a limit of what a facilitator can do. But by using the data structures, the ways of working that with a guarantee of healing themselves when merging, millions of people can type on the same Google Doc. Thousands of people can edit the same spreadsheet and so on. And then there's this just the space, the automated space itself works as a facilitator. So, and this gives the hallucination of other data types are also conflict-free, but they are not, right? Which is why we have wicked problems. So I think there is this naive fundamentalism of fun that my generation of open source programmers are bringing into the world of nonviolent communication on public matters, and just gradually learning the methodologies of dealing with the tangible world, but still keeping the inherent funness of the conflict-free intangible world. I think that's the succinct way of saying it.
I don't think mathematically. I have very low mathematical aptitudes.
No, it's good. So you can think in this picture. Yeah.
But I can. It's an interesting. It's something to meditate on. Yeah, I can think of that picture easily. Yeah. Do you know Swami Beyondananda?
No.
When you said fundamentally, and he does that. He does put the fun back into fundamental and driving your own karma. He's a master of puns. He's not a real Swami. He dresses. He's a comedian, a socially conscious, spiritually aware comedian. Dresses up as a Swami and does little punny-filled. Swami Beyondananda, Steve Behrman. He just did an interview with me last week. But if you enjoy puns, he says there's a great upwising that's needed. One of his frequently used, we got to wise up. Anyway.
Right. So, yeah, we got to wise up. I think this is great. I'll be using this word.
Yeah. You go look him up. He's
okay.
Beyondananda. And he has lots of stuff on his websites that you can just absorb and use.
Awesome. I'll do just that. So, I do feel wise up in this conversation.
God. Anyway, I think by April I will have have a little more orientation and be able to talk. Well, I don't know. I don't know what will happen by April. I really enjoyed the conversation. I want to stay in touch, and I feel it's a rare feeling to feel over my head. You know, that I tend to be thinking and perceiving in realms I don't have a lot of company in, and here I'm going, whoa, who is this? I am step up. I am intrigued.
Well, I'm happy, as I said in email, to catch up exactly 1 week from now or 2 weeks from now if your time allows.
Okay. Yeah, I have to figure out that. I keep adding layers of activity. I got 5.5 hours sleep last night and 4 hours of sleep the previous nights.
Oh, wow.
And it's not healthy for me. I can feel it.
No.
But I'm stacking initiatives on top of initiatives, all of which are compelling, and each one is more powerful than the last. And I don't yet know how to manage that lifestyle-wise. And you're one of the big focuses of that lately. Trying to absorb all this material. Now I look back at all the work I put into it, and I'm going, that was playing in the wrong playing field, but it did generate stuff we could talk about. But I would hunger more connection next week, but I need to find out where I'm going to be next week, and I need to digest my world. And I want to share this with a number of other people to help me digest it, who are colleagues. So their mouths can drop and go, oh, God, what's this?
Yeah. So for their benefit, I'm going to answer these two questions very quickly. Which are the privacy assurances, and do I have people actively looking for ways to hack the system? Because we do. We pay a lot to white hat hackers out of taxpayer money to attack the underlying system, the Sandstorm system. And we do publish vulnerabilities, but only when the upstream community fixes it within a reasonable time frame. It's called responsible disclosure. But we hire really the very best white hat hackers to make sure that it is cybersecurity-wise safe, because otherwise people can just manufacture consent that there isn't. Right? Polis used to be proprietary software, and we again convinced and worked with Colin and the team to make it free software, with the condition that anyone deploying it anywhere who make change to it has also to share its changes, not just to the original team, but to anyone using the modified system, the users. It's called strong copyleft,
right.
For that reason. And we believe strongly in that, and we believe in community or stakeholder governance of the common technology of Polis. And that is, in fact, the thing that I'm flying to Seattle to talk to Colin about, how to transition from a benevolent dictator, as is usually the case for open source project when they're small, to a multi-stakeholder governance system, which is most open source projects go when they become mature. And so this is actually what I'm flying to Seattle for. And finally, for this question, if someone has unlimited resources, how would they go about it? If someone has unlimited resources, they can do everything, right? They can go all the ways, in all the different ways. So I try not to imagine too much, but as long as they still let us have some fun, I'm sure we can replicate this model. Maybe not called V-Taiwan, but some other name. Right? As long as there's like energy.
I mean, part of the situation in the U.S. particularly, but globally, is there are some unbelievably wealthy people. You know, I think it's like in the United States, like 3 people now who own who have a net wealth as big as the bottom half of the society. It's just like that level of wealth. And I've been tracking some of the things that are being done with that money, which are changing the dynamics of society in order to generate more wealth, which is what happens when power concentrates like that. So that's why I asked. That's the motivation behind the question.
Yeah.
Like, there's a way in which this is growing in a totally different way that might not even be seen or whatever, but it's
right. So it's most about concentration of wealth. Yeah. Back when we were doing open source before it was a thing, there is this rallying cry that says Bill Gates may be the most wealthy person in the world, but he can't buy the quality of Windows operating system. And I think it is still true. Wealth can only buy things that are known, and for the true unknowns, you can't, like Bill Gates used to say that, his mission was a desktop personal computer on everyone's desktop, and it's a noble mission actually, but it's like the old government systems that says they're working for the people, right? And with all these models, what we're trying to say is that we're working with the people. We are the people, right? So with, not for. And there are things like Linux that can only be built when you work with people. They can't ever be built by things that are top-down or working for the people. And it's fundamental. And I think wealth plays relatively small, little factor when you're in realms like this one. But of course, with wealth, people can try to restrict the solution space. But I'm just very happy Bill Gates is not doing that. He is actually doing social entrepreneurship and philanthropy pretty effectively. So there's that.
We shall see.
We shall see.
We are in the mystery.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I should probably. I think I have got. I started with. It's like the intentions. I got my intentions satisfied or addressed, and in ways that I did not anticipate. Now I have to digest my experience, and there's a way in which, when I try to think what my biggest use was, I have a version of Mickey's question in terms of how could we be of service, because there's a way in which I sense you carrying the sensibilities that I've had in remarkable new ways that, if they manifested well, would be way beyond any of the things I've been thinking in terms of what kind of impact I want to have in the world. I had a heart attack last year, and as they were wheeling me into the emergency room, I was thinking, thank God I got the pattern language done. It's sort of, this is a legacy project, and there's a way, if there was anything that I could do or say that would enhance the ability of this energy that you're working with, I don't know exactly how to label it, but then enhance its ability to go forth and multiply. I would feel that was a far more valuable legacy than anything I could create out of my own experience. There's a contribute to something that is bigger than anything I've ever thought about that I would like to do. So if you bump into anything like that, let me know. And we'll just keep talking and doing whatever the heck we're going to be doing.
Oh, yeah. And for the time being, I think what we both can do is to release this video to the public on the internet under no copyright whatsoever, if you're okay with that.
Oh, sure. And I don't copyright any of my stuff, really.
And go forth and exponentiate, whatever.
And ideally there would be a space, which I don't know how to create, for talking about this, for connecting up, for people who look at the video and go, whoa, I have questions. I want to talk to other people about it. I want to generate more videos of conversations about whatever, so that it has a chance to replicate in whatever forky ways want to happen.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm Audrey T. I'm Audrey T on Twitter, and so and that's how you found me, right? Or your friend did. So we can carry on the conversation on Twitter, and I think there's multiple online spaces where people care a lot about this thing. Lumio actually is one of the prominent spaces, and so yeah, we can connect people who jump in and do both.
So you'll have to nurse me along on that, because I'm not familiar with the vast majority of platforms you use, and if you want to
it's good.
Set something up and invite me in, and I'll see what I can do.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll invite you to the GovZero Slack, and it needs some hand-holding, but I think it's surmountable. And that's I think the first step, and we'll meet there and figure out something. There's change agents all over the world thinking about more or less the same dimensions as we do.
Okay, so maybe some of the next things might be introductions, you introducing me into some of the platforms, so I can function in that world with you. Because I think it was the Slack that I went to when I was first trying